Immortal Cultivation family. My comprehension ability can be stored dest video experiment para intretenimiento y no infringe derechos de autor en iles. Los derechos de la novela while our imaginación del autor original. No reclamamos propiedad. No te gusta respirar y queers escuchar este fanfic completo ahora. Suscrea bet en nuestro Patreon. Donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 51. Remaining picture. Guang'an Port. Yang's shipping company. An old man in his 60s, with grey hair, but full of energy, was dancing and introducing the 10 slave ships he ordered to Chen Daoxuan. Chen Daoxuan, please look, this is the best-selling slave ship of our Yang's shipping company. This ship is more than 150 feet long and 20 feet wide, and can transport more than 1,000 slaves at most. Look at the materials used in our slave ships. The main material of the hull is made of sunken ironwood, which can prevent seawater erosion. The keel is engraved with wind-gathering formations and water avoidance formations, allowing you to gallop freely in the sea. As we all know, the biggest problem of slave ships is that slaves die during sea transportation. Our slave ships have also made great improvements in this regard. Chen Daoxuan, please follow me. The old man of Yang's shipping company led Chen Daoxuan into the cabin with a brisk pace and carefully checked the various conveniences of the slave ship. After listening to the old man's introduction, Chen Daoxuan was very satisfied in his heart, but his face showed a very calm expression. The quality of the ships of Yang's shipping company is known to everyone in Guang'an Prefecture, otherwise I would not have found you first. That is, our ships. Before the old man finished speaking, Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, but your prices are much more expensive than Zhao's shipping company, Zhao shipping company and Wu shipping company. Hearing this, the old man Yang's face froze, and then he smiled and said, you get what you pay for. If I say that our Chen family will purchase a large number of ships in the next few years, I wonder if I can get your internal lowest price? Oh. The old man Yang's heart moved slightly. I wonder what brother Chen means by purchasing a large number of ships. At least more than 100 ships. Chen Daoxuan raised a finger and said. Hearing this, the old man of the Yang family cupped his hands and said with a fake smile, fellow Daoist Chen, how can I trust you? Have you heard of the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Shop? Hearing this, a trace of surprise finally flashed across the face of the old man of the Yang family, and he cupped his hands and said, so the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Shop that has been making a lot of noise in the Senexai Yufang market recently is your Chen family's property. I'm so sorry. The old man of the Yang family finally looked serious. As everyone knows, although the Xuanhu Island Chen family behind the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Shop is a small family, it has been remembered by many foundation building families because it has a weapon refiner. In other words, the Xuanhu Island Chen family has always been unknown, and the supply of the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Shop is insufficient. The outside world speculates that the Chen family's weapon refiner should not be of high rank. Otherwise, there would have been foundation building families who went to make friends with them long ago. In Guang'an Prefecture, foundation building families are not uncommon, and some foundation building families even live in a very miserable state. The foundation building cultivators in the family are not as free and easy as the foundation building cultivators of the Senexai. This kind of foundation building family is completely lucky. They rely on their children to make enough contributions in the battlefield of Chuan State, so they have the chance to break through to the foundation building stage. Such a foundation building family, in terms of foundation, is not much stronger than those small families. For them, it is a blessing to be able to make friends with a senior weapon refiner. At least in the future, when the children of the family need magic tools, they don't have to buy second-hand goods discarded by the children of the big families. Although the Yang family is a big family of immortal cultivation in Guang'an Prefecture, they have always had the problem of insufficient supply of magic tools in the family. The reason for this is that the Yang family has put all their energy into the construction of various ships, ignoring the training of weapon refiners and alchemists in the family, resulting in the supply of magic tools and elixirs in the family being controlled by the Zhao family. Faced with this situation, the Yang family has always wanted to reverse it. But the training of weapon refiners and alchemists requires too many resources and foundation in the family. Not everyone is as perverted as Chen Daoxuan, who can teach himself with a second level weapon refiner inheritance jade slip. In his previous life, Chen Daoxuan's behavior was like an illiterate person who took a few books and taught himself to become a doctor in a few years. This is also the reason why the Yang family has been traveling around, constantly trying to win over major foundation building families and emerging forces, hoping to jointly build an immortal city to fight against the Zhao family. Making friends with families with weapon refiners and alchemists is a political task within the Yang family. Therefore, the old man showed a serious look after hearing Chen Daoxuan introduce himself. After a moment of silence, the old man looked up and said, "In this case, let's give you 1,000 spirit stones for this slave ship." 10 slave ships, a total of 10,000 spirit stones, can be regarded as a good relationship between my Yang family and your Xuanhu Island Chen family. As he said this, the old man of the Yang family showed a kind smile on his face. "In this case, thank you senior, your polite fellow Taoist." The old man of the Yang family cupped his hands, and the two of them were in harmony. The issue of the slave ship of the Yang family shipping company was settled. When Chen Daoxuan rushed back to the Sangxiu Fangshi, it was almost evening. The scattered cultivators who had been surrounding the Rainbow Sound flying sword shop gradually dispersed. Apparently, today's lucky draw event had ended. Back to the shop. Chen Zion was packing up the lucky draw boxes and other sundries. Seeing Chen Daoxuan, Chen Zion raised his head and said, "Is it done?" "Yes, it's done. I'll go to the Guanghan Prefecture slave market tomorrow to select female slaves from the Izumo Kingdom. I'll return to Xuanhu Island in 3 days at most." Hearing this, Chen Zion did not show any reluctance, but instead breathed a sigh of relief. "It's better to go back. Going back earlier will also allow me to refine the magic weapon earlier." Seeing Chen Zion showing such a capitalist face, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but twitch his mouth, silently stepped forward to help him pack up the sundries, and stopped talking. Just as Chen Daoxuan and the others finished packing up the sundries and were about to close a store, a figure broke into the shop. Chen Zion walked forward without a look on his face and said with a bow, "Dear guest, our shop is closed today. If you want to buy a flying sword, please come early tomorrow." Chen Daoxuan looked at the man who broke into the shop. The man was about 40 years old, with a rough face, wearing a linen shirt, and seemed to have something wrapped in his arms, looking cautious. As soon as Chen Zion finished speaking, the man said in a muffled voice, "I'm not here to buy magic tools, but to sell treasures." Hearing this, Chen Zion's face sank. He has been in Guanghan Prefecture's Sangxiu market for so long, and he doesn't say that he encounters scammers like this who come to the store to cheat every day, but it is not an exaggeration to encounter them once every 2 or 3 days at the beginning. However, as he opened the store for a longer time, these scammers seemed to know that this store is not easy to cheat, and gradually stopped coming here. Unexpectedly, today, he encountered this kind of scammer again. Chen Zion immediately scolded, "Do you choose to go out by yourself, or let me call the Zhao family's law enforcement team?" Hearing the Zhao family's law enforcement team, the panic in the middle-aged man's eyes flashed away. Forget it. I can't sell the treasure map that came out of the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion." The middle-aged man muttered softly and turned to leave. "Wait." Hearing the 4 words Shenzhou Immortal Mansion, Chen Daoxuan's heart moved slightly and stopped the other party. Chapter 52, God's Absolute Immortal Palace. Hearing the word wait, the middle-aged man who was about to step out of the door took back his steps. A hint of joy flashed in his eyes, but when he turned around, his face was full of indignation, and he said, "Aren't you going to find the Zhao family law enforcement team? You are polite. May I know your name?" Chen Daoxuan completely ignored the other party's indignation and said with a smile, "My surname is Sunday. Sunday Oiao. What do you mean by the treasure map of the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion you just mentioned?" Hearing this, the man surnamed Sun unconsciously tightened the treasure in his arms, but then he thought of something and gritted his teeth to take out the treasure in his arms. "It's this treasure." The man surnamed Sun took out a fragment of the map from his arms. "Can you show it to me?" Chen Daoxuan stretched out his hand. As if seeing that the middle-aged man had some concerns, Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, "This is Guanghan Prefecture. Are you afraid that I will rob you?" Hearing this, the middle-aged man finally let down his guard and handed over the fragment of the map. Sure enough, just as the middle-aged man said, the map depicted a navigation route. However, this navigation route map only has half, and the other half seems to have been torn off, leaving only a fragment of the map. Seeing this, Chen Daoxuan shook his head. Let alone whether your treasure map of the godly immortal mansion is real or not, the fact that it is only a fragment of the map is enough to prove that this map is trash. After saying that, Chen Daoxuan directly threw the fragment of the map to the other party. Hearing this, the middle-aged man was anxious. How can you say it is trash? I bought it with great difficulty from the SYNOPSIS market. If I wasn't planning to buy a magic weapon to go to the battlefield of Izumo State, and I didn't have enough spirit stones, how could I sell this thing? The middle-aged man looked anxious. I'm sure that the other half of this map is very likely to be on a stall in the SYNOPSIS market. Oh. Why are you so sure? Chen Daoxuan became interested. Daoyao, please look at the tier of this map. Is it very new? Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan looked at the place where the other party pointed. Indeed, the tear in the broken map was obviously caused recently, which means that there should be another broken map not far from where the middle-aged man bought this broken map. And the SYNOPSIS Fang market is full of various sundries. It is very likely that another broken map is hidden in a stall in the SYNOPSIS Fang market. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan said calmly, how much do you plan to sell it for? The middle-aged man raised a finger. 1,000. Goodbye. Chen Daoxuan bowed and said no more. Seeing his look, the middle-aged man became anxious and said, then how much do you plan to pay? 10 spirit stones. Puff. The middle-aged man's heart suddenly spurted out a mouthful of old blood, but thinking of the purpose of his trip, he hesitated and said, add a little more, and I will sell it. Just 10 spirit stones. You can sell it or not. Chen Daoxuan was firm. The middle-aged man's chest kept rising and falling, and it was obvious that Chen Daoxuan was very angry, but in the end, he did not leave in anger, but threw the incomplete map directly to Chen Daoxuan, saying, okay. 10 spirit stones are 10 spirit stones. Sloppy. Seeing the other party's appearance, Chen Daoxuan knew that he was probably fooled. Chen Zion stood by and said nothing, quietly watching Chen Daoxuan bargain with the other party until the middle-aged man left with the spirit stones. Then he laughed out loud. Ha ha ha. Chen Daoxuan was a little embarrassed and bowed his hands and said, Uncle 13, please don't make fun of me. Hearing this, Chen Zion smiled and said, you have been in the SYNOPSIS market for a short time. When you stay for a while, you will often encounter such scammers. Today is also a lesson for you. Chen Zion shook his head. After saying that, he looked at the incomplete map in Chen Daoxuan's hand and said with a smile, it's quite realistic. The treasure map of the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion. Haha. Just as he took the treasure map from Chen Daoxuan, a golden light fell into his eyes. HMM. Chen Zion's face suddenly became serious. What's wrong, Uncle 13? Chen Zion raised his hand, carefully placed the incomplete map in his hand to observe, and scanned it with his spiritual sense, but he still found nothing. Did I see it wrong? Chen Zion couldn't help but doubt himself. But he immediately shook his head. He must have seen it right just now. There was indeed a golden light. As if thinking of something, Chen Zion turned to Chen Daoxuan and said, go and close the door. Seeing Uncle 13's look, Chen Daoxuan knew that he must have discovered something, so he closed the door of the shop and set up a soundproof formation. Daoxuan, light it with fire. Remember, don't make the fire too big. Although he didn't know what Chen Zion was going to do, for Chen Daoxuan, who had mastered the art of controlling fire, Chen Zion's instructions were a piece of cake. Soon, the grey incomplete map gradually changed its appearance under the slow burning of Chen Daoxuan's small fire. The old marks on the surface of the incomplete map were burned bit by Chen Daoxuan's precise fire control, leaving only a piece of gold foil less than half a millimeter thick. Put away the fire control technique. The uncle and nephew looked at each other. Chen Zion grabbed the gold foil in his hand and murmured, could the treasure map be real? Chen Daoxuan also looked at the gold foil in Chen Zion's hand, and suddenly a feeling of pie in the sky came to his mind. After a careful inspection, Chen Daoxuan found something wrong. Uncle 13, you see, this piece of gold foil doesn't seem to be complete. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan looked at the gold foil carefully. As Chen Daoxuan said, this piece of gold foil was obviously missing. Seeing this, Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. If this is really a complete map of the ruins of the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion, then the value is too terrifying. As we all know, the real Shenzhou back then was a fierce man who had caused chaos in the Huangxing Sea for nearly 100 years by himself. How much wealth would the cave he left behind have? Chen Daoxuan didn't think it was a big deal. He had learned about the real Shenzhou carefully. In his opinion, this was a person with great luck who lost his mind after getting a great opportunity and dared to rise up against the rule of the Cunning sword sect. Brainless. Chen Daoxuan didn't know how strong the Cunning sword sect was, but he knew that there were hundreds of Jiandan families in the entire Huangxing Sea, and nearly 10 Yuanying families. But such a huge family of immortal cultivators had to submit to the rule of the Cunning sword sect. You can imagine how terrifying the power of the Cunning sword sect is. The real Shenzhou was at most in the late Jiandan stage back then, but he was crazy and wanted to overthrow the rule of the Cunning sword sect. What else could this be if not brainless? Chen Daoxuan didn't really believe that such an extremely arrogant person could leave much wealth in his cave. Chen Daoxuan sighed, handed over the gold foil, and said, "Keep it. If you have the chance to find the other half of the gold foil in the future, it will also add a little foundation to the family." Chen Daoxuan also realized that this famous Shenzhou Zenran would not leave many treasures in his cave. Because Shenzhou Zenran is a casual cultivator, and casual cultivators usually put all their wealth in the storage bag they carry with them, and never put it in any cave. After thinking this through, Chen Daoxuan showed little interest in the so-called Shenzhou Zenfu. Chapter 53 Bait. Guanghan Prefecture's Casual Cultivator Market. Wuzin. The middle-aged man surnamed Sun left the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Shop, turned around and stopped in front of the Wuzin to make sure that no one was following him. He walked to a guest room with ease and knocked on the door. "Are you back?" As the door opened, a tall, thin pale-faced middle-aged cultivator with a cultivation level of the 9th level of key refining was sitting cross-legged on the warm jade cushion in the guest room. The white-faced middle-aged cultivator raised his eyelids, looked at the rough-looking middle-aged man surnamed Sun, and asked, "I'm back." The middle-aged man surnamed Sun bowed and replied, and then said, "Brother, I have done everything you asked me to do. The bait has been delivered, and I'm just waiting for the fish to take the bait." As he spoke, the man surnamed Sun narrated the scene just now. After the narration, he could not help but complain, "This kid from the Chen family is really stingy. I spent a lot of effort to make the treasure map, but he only gave me 10 spirit stones." As he said that, the middle-aged man surnamed Sun took out the spirit stones. The middle-aged monk with a white face glanced at it and smiled. "It doesn't matter. The bait has been spread. We just have to wait for the fish to take the bait." Hearing this, the middle-aged man surnamed Sun looked as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Seeing the doubt on his brother's face, the white-faced middle-aged man glanced at him and said, "You and I are brothers from the same mother. If you have something to say, just say it clearly." Hearing this, the middle-aged man surnamed Sun cupped his hands and said, "Brother, I don't quite understand. Since we want to rob this kid from the Chen family, why don't we just kill him halfway, or simply sell the complete treasure map to him? You are just too reckless. Otherwise why would we hide in Guanghan Prefecture from Kang's house city?" The white-faced middle-aged man shook his head. "The Lingsu warships of the Zhao family in Guanghan Prefecture have been patrolling the safe waterways in the sea to ensure the safety of passing merchant ships. Although we can intercept them halfway, we will encounter uncontrollable risks. We are seeking wealth, not risking our lives." After a pause, he continued to explain, "As for what you said about selling the complete treasure map directly to the other party." At this point, the white-faced middle-aged man laughed. "Do you know? Almost everyone in the world thinks that they are smart people. Do you know what the biggest shortcoming of smart people is?" The man surnamed Sun shook his head blankly. "I don't know. The biggest shortcoming of smart people is that they only believe what they see with their own eyes and what they think. Smart people are naturally wary of things like pie in the sky, and what I have to do next is to eliminate the other party's vigilance." The white-faced middle-aged man talked freely. Brother, I don't understand these things. Anyway, I will do whatever you say, the middle-aged man surnamed Sun said with a simple and honest look. Seeing this, the white-faced monk smiled and shook his head. Guang'an Prefecture, slave market. Chen Daoxuan and his clansmen were strolling in this huge slave market. Beside him, there was a slave trader of the 7th level of key refining. Boss, will the female slaves from Chuan Kingdom here resent the master family after they are brought back? This is what Chen Daoxuan is most worried about. He needs women from Chuan Kingdom to reproduce for his Chen clan, not to find a group of enemies to go back. Otherwise, influenced by this group of people who hate the mother of the Chen family, the descendants of the Chen family will hate the family when they grow up. This is not to develop the family, but to plant the seeds of disaster for the family. Hearing this, the shopkeeper of the slave trader shook his head and said with a smile, "Friend Chen, don't worry about this matter. If our trader can't even solve this little thing, why do we still run this business? The stores have been demolished by the major immortals of Wangxinghe long ago." He paused. "For every female slave for sale in the trader, we have monks who cast spells on the female slaves to ensure that they forget their hatred for Wangxinghe. Of course, if you abuse the female slaves after buying them back, then our trader cannot guarantee whether they hate you." Hearing this explanation, Chen Daoxuan was slightly relieved. Sure enough, as he guessed, the major immortals of Wangxinghe would not fail to think of the problems he could think of. Since they dared to buy female slaves from Izumo to reproduce their descendants, it proved that there would be no legacy of buying female slaves from Izumo. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan smiled bitterly and said, "The slaves in your company are good, but they are very expensive." "Fellow Daoist Chen, you are joking," the slave merchant said with a smile. "The latest batch of slaves from the battlefield of Izumo Kingdom has not been delivered yet, so the price of slaves has increased slightly. What's more, the female slaves you want are the highest grade here. They are all young female slaves under the age of 20 with good looks. 1 spirit stone each is really not expensive." As he said, the shopkeeper continued to sell. "We also have cheap female slaves, but they are all old and ugly, and their fertility is not good. You can only use such female slaves as servants when you buy them home. The price is 100 times lower." Seeing that the shopkeeper still wanted to sell young and strong male slaves who could help the master to farm, Chen Daoxuan shook his head. "We only want female slaves in our Chen family." "Okay." The shopkeeper looked regretful at first, and then nodded readily. "We will transport all the 10,000 female slaves from Izumo Kingdom that you want to your slave ship within 3 days. Our company guarantees that every female slave you buy is clean and healthy. Please rest assured of our reputation." Chen Daoxuan was relieved about this. If the female slaves he bought were the kind that were bought one and got one free, his slave company would have been demolished long ago and would not have been operating in Guang'an Prefecture for so long. After negotiating the purchase of the female slaves from Chuan country and paying the deposit to the slave company, the next step was to wait for the slave company to transport the female slaves to the slave ship. These things were naturally watched by the Chen family, and the affairs of the flying sword shop were also taken care of by his 13th uncle Chen Zian. These days, he, the young patriarch of the Chen family, was completely free. When people are free, they want to find something to do. Perhaps it was because of the water spirit beads and wind and thunder array plates that he bought in the Sanxi market last time, or perhaps it was because of what the man surnamed Sun who sold the treasure map of the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion said yesterday. Looking at the bustling Sanxi market, Chen Daoxuan felt a little excited. Walking in the bustling Sanxi market, Chen Daoxuan strolled in front of one stall after another. It must be said that he was completely lucky when he bought the 2 treasures, the water spirit pearl and the wind and thunder formation plate, last time. In fact, the things sold in front of the stalls of the casual cultivators and the casual cultivator market are almost all garbage, either incomplete magic tools or broken talismans. Chen Daoxuan even saw someone selling waste pills that had been refined, and they were not afraid of killing people. After seeing the treasures in Zhao's auction house in the core business district, the garbage here was really hard for Chen Daoxuan to see. He didn't stop until he walked to a stall set up by a 9th level key refining cultivator. Looking at the dazzling array of sundries on the other side stall, Chen Daoxuan squatted down calmly and said, "Dao, how much do you sell this thing for?" Chapter 54 Return with a full load. The stall owner in front of Chen Daoxuan was a white-faced monk at the 9th level of key refining. He had a delicate appearance and looked more like a scholar than a monk. When the white-faced monk heard Chen Daoxuan's question, he glanced at the talisman that Chen Daoxuan pointed at and raised his head and said, "Fellow Daoist, you have good eyes. This talisman is called the Ice Talisman, and it is a first-class top-grade talisman. When released in a critical moment, it can turn into an ice wall about 10 feet thick to resist the enemy's attack." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan was a little moved. He pointed at the talisman and said, "Can I try it?" "Of course." The white-faced monk made a gesture of invitation. Chen Daoxuan picked up the talisman and observed it carefully. In the cultivation world, talismans can be divided into two types according to the materials used, namely paper talismans and jade talismans. The so-called paper talismans are made by monks grinding the stems of special spiritual plants into paper and then engraving the spells on the talisman paper. The advantage of paper talismans is that the materials used to make them are cheap, and monks do not need to have a lot of wealth to try to make them. But the disadvantage is that due to the defects of the paper talisman material itself, the grade of the drawn talisman is generally not high. And because the paper talisman does not infuse much true ki, its preservation time is not long. Usually, except for low-level casual cultivators, few cultivators use it in battle. As for the second type of talisman, the jade talisman, it is much more precious. Because the grades of the jade used to make jade talismans are different, there are first level jade and fifth level jade, so the talismans made can generally cover all grades. In the cultivation world, casual cultivators generally dare not provoke disciples of sects or children of large families, because they do not know whether the other party has talismans that far exceed their strength. If a key refining cultivator holds a second level talisman in his hand, it can be stimulated in a life and death crisis and even burst out with the attack of a foundation building cultivator. How can an ordinary key refining cultivator survive such an attack? As for why key refining cultivators do not carry higher grade third level talismans, one is because the price of third level talismans is extremely high. Unless the key refining cultivator has an amazing background, it is impossible to afford it. There is another reason, that is, the third level spiritual talisman is extremely powerful, and the spiritual consciousness of the key refining cultivator is too weak. Although the spiritual talisman does not need to be activated by the cultivator's own power, it still needs to be controlled by the spiritual consciousness. And with the strength of the spiritual consciousness of the key refining cultivator, the maximum range covered by the spiritual consciousness is estimated to be less than the attack range of the third level spiritual talisman. This is not attacking the enemy, but suicide. The spiritual talisman in Chen Daoxuan's hand at this moment is a spiritual talisman made of first level spiritual jade, that is, a jade talisman. After a careful inspection, Chen Daoxuan found that the spiritual talisman was well preserved and was a rare fine product. Thinking of this, he raised his head and asked, "Dao, I wonder what the price of this spiritual talisman is?" 100 spiritual stones. The white-faced cultivator smiled and stretched out a finger. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan shook his head. 100 spirit stones are almost enough to buy a first-grade mid-grade flying sword. It's too expensive. Dao, you can't say that. Although 100 spirit stones can buy a first-grade mid-grade flying sword, where can you find a high-quality flying sword in this casual cultivator market? The white-faced monk continued. Besides, at a critical moment, my talisman can at least block 3 attacks from a first-grade high-grade magic weapon controlled by a cultivator in the late stage of key refining. You should know that defensive magic weapons are far more expensive than offensive magic weapons, and the same is true for talismans. Seeing that Chen Daoxuan was still hesitant, the white-faced monk made a regretful expression. "Forget it, take a look at these treasures of mine, and I'll pick 3 for you as a bonus. How about it?" Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan looked at the treasure that the white-faced monk was pointing at, shook his head and said, "You." Before Chen Daoxuan could speak, the white-faced monk slapped the storage bag, and a bunch of messy things poured out. Suddenly, a familiar fragment of a picture came into Chen Daoxuan's eyes, which made his heart skip a beat. All the things I have are here. Although these are not worth much, the 3 pieces together are worth more than 20 spirit stones. If it still doesn't work, then forget it. The white-faced monk said, waving his hand with a look of regret, and was about to collect the sundries on the ground. Chen Daoxuan's face was tangled. After hesitating for a long time, he finally said, okay, 100 spirit stones is 100 spirit stones. After that, Chen Daoxuan took out 100 spirit stones from his storage bag, and then put the ice talisman into the storage bag very preciously. After doing all this, he looked at the pile of sundries on the ground with disdain, picked and chose 3 pieces, and said, okay, these 3 pieces. The money and goods are paid, and goodbye, fellow Taoist. The white-faced monk looked at Chen Daoxuan putting the 3 sundries into his pocket, and seemed to be very happy, because he had made a deal. 3 days later, 10 slave ships loaded with supplies and female slaves from the Izumo kingdom slowly sailed from the port of Guang'an prefecture to the sea. The fleet of 10 slave ships seemed to be very large, but in the port of Guang'an prefecture, where there were many ships, they were like a few tiny ants. Standing on the deck of the slave ship named Kangan, Chen Daoxuan looked back at Guang'an prefecture, and said goodbye to his uncle silently in his heart. Guang'an prefecture wharf. Uncle 13 looked at the fleet of slave ships that gradually blurred in the distance, sighed, and turned around silently, and returned to Sanxiafang City. As the fleet entered the vast Huangxing Sea, looking at the endless sea, Chen Daoxuan's mind suddenly opened up. Because he knew that in front of him, there was a family waiting for him to build, and there was a group of eager tribesmen waiting for him to lead. Thinking of this, the sadness of parting in Chen Daoxuan's heart was thrown aside, and he was full of energy. Return to Xuanhu Island, produce flying swords, cultivate spiritual veins, expand the family population, train family monks. Countless things are waiting for him. How can Chen Daoxuan be decadent? Half a month later. A deserted island in the southwest of Huangxing Sea. In a man-made cave, decay refining monks are silently waiting for the fish to take the bait. In this cave, there are a total of 3 formations and killing formations, which are enough to make any key refining monk who sets foot here die. Brother, why hasn't the Chen family kid come yet? It's been half a month. The rough middle-aged man surnamed Sun seemed to be very impatient and said irritably. The white-faced monk was quite calm and said calmly, wait a little longer. 7 days later, the 2 monks flew out of the cave on the deserted island with dust on their faces. Brother, do you think the kid from the Chen family has discovered our plan? Hearing this, the white-faced monk carefully recalled the look on Chen Daoxuan's face when he took away the incomplete map that day and shook his head and said, no, he couldn't have discovered it. Then why? The burly man was indescribable. Why didn't the other party feel tempted by the great temptation of the godly immortal mansion? Hearing his brother's question, the white-faced monk shook his head. He was also very puzzled. Finally, he smiled freely and said, interesting, really interesting. This kid from the Chen family is not greedy. What? The burly man didn't quite understand. I mean, he actually didn't feel greedy in the face of such a great temptation as the godly immortal mansion. It shows that he is mature and steady. He doesn't look like a teenager at all. Is he as good as you say? The burly man thought about how Chen Daoxuan looked when he was deceived by him that day, and said with some disbelief. The white-faced monk shook his head and stopped explaining. Forget it, we don't need to provoke this kind of enemy. He thought for a while. I plan to take you to the battlefield of Chuan Kingdom when you break through the 7th level of key refining. With our savings over the years and the military exploits in the battlefield of Chuan Kingdom, it is enough for you and me to break through to the foundation building stage. When we both break through to the foundation building stage, you and I will go to that place to explore. Hearing about that place, the burly man's face flushed with excitement. He cupped his hands and said with red eyes, brother, it's all my fault that I have poor qualifications. I have implicated you all these years. You and I are brothers. Why are you saying these polite words? The white-faced monk patted the burly man on the shoulder. On the other side, if Chen Daoxuan knew that someone evaluated him as being cautious and steady beyond his age, I don't know what he would think. The reason why he didn't explore the Shenzhou Immortal Mansion was that he didn't have the time. Compared with the development of the family and the huge dividends brought by industrialization, a mere Shenzhou Immortal Mansion is nothing. Si estas escuchando esta novela en canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas. Significa que descargaran y subirán sinas fuso ten invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas ali encontrarás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos géneros. Te esperamos para sumergirte en mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 55 Family Property Statistics. Near the port of Xuanhu Island, in the cabin of the Kangayan, Chen Daoxuan sat cross-legged. At this moment, the cabin he was in was completely different from the Kangayan cargo ship left in Guang'an Prefecture. Although the Kangayan was a slave ship, it could also be used to transport supplies, but it was not as convenient as the Kangayan. But in terms of cabin comfort, the Kangayan was far better than the Kangayan. If you have to make an analogy, it was the difference between a luxury cruise ship and a large cargo ship. In the cabin, a snow-white flying sword in front of Chen Daoxuan kept circling and dancing, and the sword light kept falling like drizzle in the entire cabin. If a cultivator accidentally stepped into it, even a cultivator of the 9th level of key refining would probably be torn to pieces by the drizzle like sword energy. After a while, Chen Daoxuan opened his eyes. After more than 2 months, I finally cultivated this covering rain sword art to perfection. Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief, then frowned. This covering rain sword art is completely different from the chasing wind sword art. If the chasing wind sword art only greatly increases the speed and power of the flying sword, then the covering rain sword art greatly increases the weirdness of the flying sword's attack. As for the increase in the power of the flying sword, it is not as sharp as the chasing wind sword art. However, Chen Daoxuan looked down at the Fixu sword in his hand. My Fixu sword is a water attributed flying sword, which is more compatible with this covering rain sword art, and has a greater overall power. Thinking that his strength has been further improved, Chen Daoxuan felt a little happy. In addition to pursuing immortality, another major goal of cultivators is to pursue their own powerful strength. It is said that there are extreme cultivators in Xian'an. In order to gain powerful strength, they even practice some evil techniques that consume their own lifespan and blood. According to the records of these two jade slips, the chasing wind sword art and the covering rain sword art should be 2 parts of a set of sword arts. The complete sword art should be called chasing wind and covering rain sword, but I don't know what it means. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan shook his head without any clue. Forget it, don't think too much. It took only more than 4 months to practice the 2 first level sword arts of chasing wind sword art and covering rain sword art to perfection. Chen Daoxuan didn't know if there would be anyone who would do it later, but he was sure that this was definitely an unprecedented feat. At least in the history of Kainiuan sword sect, he, Chen Daoxuan, was the only one. After completing today's practice, Chen Daoxuan stood up from the futon and walked to a desk to sit down. Calculating the time, it was almost time to reach Xuanhu Island. Chen Daoxuan planned to make a simple statistics of the accounts of Guang'an Prefecture on this trip. After thinking about it, Chen Daoxuan simply decided to sort out the family property of the entire family. There are too few people available in the family now, and there are many things that he cannot hand over to ordinary clan members to take care of. For example, the flying sword shop in the Guang'an Prefecture Sanxiu market and other non-clan industries. Now my Chen family owns real estate. 1 Xuanhu Island, 1 Spirit Eye, 1 Old Earth Fire Room, 1 Flying Sword Factory, and a shop in the Guang'an Prefecture Sanxiu market. In addition to real estate, the family originally had a working capital of 66,692 spirit stones. Among them, 64,000 spirit stones were obtained from the trade with the mermaids. 2,250 spirit stones were the total revenue of the Hongmeng flying sword shop during this period, and more than 400 spirit stones were the original funds of the family. However, the materials purchased by the family this time are also relatively large. Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but feel a little distressed when he calculated this. He didn't feel it when he spent the money at that time, but now that he counted the accounts, he felt a little distressed. This time I went to Guang'an Prefecture to purchase 10 slave ships, spending 10,000 spirit stones, and purchased 10,000 female slaves from the Izumo Kingdom, spending 10,000 spirit stones, purchasing a set of soul enriching formations, spending 1,500 spirit stones, purchasing the dragon python swallowing heaven technique, spending 1,000 spirit stones, purchasing the instrument soul testing disc for testing spiritual roots, spending 1,000 spirit stones, and purchasing the ice charm and the map of the ruins of the godly immortal mansion, spending 110 spirit stones. These cost a total of 23,610 spirit stones. The rest is the biggest expense of this trip, the red copper and black iron ore materials purchased at the Wu family treasure pavilion. This time, a total of 40,000 spirit stones were consumed in the Wu family treasure pavilion. To purchase spiritual ore materials, a total of more than 12,800 kilograms of red copper and more than 1,280 kilograms of black iron ore. Compared with the spiritual ore materials purchased last time, this time is more than 10 times more. Calculated, unless the production capacity of the Flying Sword Factory is expanded, it will be enough for the Flying Sword Factory to produce for a year. Thinking of these spiritual ore materials, Chen Daoxuan's heartache suddenly improved. The remaining 3082 spiritual stones, minus the food and other supplies purchased for ordinary tribesmen, there are still 2,000 spiritual stones left. Calculating this, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but take a breath and muttered, more than 60,000 spiritual stones are gone. No wonder Uncle 13 scolded me for being a spendthrift. I really want to slap myself. Of course, he said so. If he was given another chance, he might not even be able to keep the last 2,000 spiritual stones and spend them all. Because as a time traveler, Chen Daoxuan knew that money is a resource for circulation. More than 60,000 spiritual stones are piled up in the tribe library without circulation. Except for looking good, they have no use. Compared with those high-debt enterprises in his previous life, he is already conservative enough. 3 days later, 10 huge slave ships slowly docked at the port of Shuanghu Island. In the more than 2 months since Chen Daoxuan left, Chen Biwang has not been idle. The craftsmen of the entire KO were busy. This is why everyone in the Chen clan practices martial arts, and the lowest level of cultivation is the acquired realm. Otherwise, such high-intensity labor would have exhausted ordinary people long ago. After getting off the boat, Chen Daoxuan found that Chen Zhi had brought almost all the young and strong men in the clan. From everyone's expressions, Chen Daoxuan could only use one word to describe it: eagerly. Of course, the target of everyone's attention seemed not to be him, the young clan leader, but the young and beautiful girls on the 10 slave ships he brought back. Ahem. Chen Daoxuan flew in front of the county magistrate Chen Zhi and coughed softly. Everyone reacted and bowed to Chen Daoxuan. See the young clan leader. Okay, Chen Daoxuan knew that everyone's mind was not here and waved his hand. Where is Chen Gankeo? Chen Biwang had been officially appointed as the General Gankeo of Changping County because of his contribution to the construction of the Fijian factory building and was in charge of all construction matters in the Chen clan. It is somewhat similar to the ancient Minister of Works. Young Patriarch Chen Gankeo is still busy building a new residential area in Changping County. With so many people coming at once, the young and strong in the clan are in high spirits. After more than 2 months of hard work, they have barely completed the expansion of the new residential area. Chen Gankeo is busy with some finishing work, so he was unable to come to greet the young patriarch. Please don't blame me. Chen Zhi bowed his hands and said sincerely. Hearing that Chen Biwang was still busy at this moment, Chen Daoxuan said with some emotion, such a respectable elder, how can I blame him? Hearing this, Chen Zhi was shocked. All along, mortals have lived under the wings of immortal cultivators. In this world, when have immortal cultivators ever looked at mortals? Only their young patriarch truly sees the efforts of mortals and remembers them in his heart. In this regard, in Chen Zhi's heart, the young patriarch has surpassed the patriarchs of the Chen family. Chapter 56, Screening Immortal Seedlings. Shuanghu Island Port. As the young and beautiful female slaves on the slave ship lined up in a long line and got off the ship one after another, The men of the Chen family burst into cheers again and again, and the warm atmosphere seemed to be able to overturn the entire island. The young female slaves of the Chuan kingdom were all trembling when they saw this scene, and their eyes were full of fear and despair for the future. They didn't know what fate was waiting for them, and they were like frightened little beasts. Seeing this scene, Chen Daoxuan, a modern time traveler, felt uncomfortable. But he knew that this was the best choice for the Chen family to expand their population in a short period of time. Moreover, compared with those mortals who were slaughtered by the monk's army, these Chuan women in front of them already had the best future. At least on Shuanghu Island, they would not be threatened by hunger and death, and would not be humiliated by others. The only thing they had to do was to marry the men of the Chen family and reproduce. Chen Zhi, I'm here. Chen Zhi bowed quickly. Give the order. Before these Izumo women are calmed down, the men of the Chen family are not allowed to harass them. Also, the work of settling them is up to you. Don't let me down. At the end, Chen Daoxuan gave him a warning look. With Chen Zhi's intelligence, he instantly understood this look. It was Chen Daoxuan warning him that county officials must not take advantage of these women by taking advantage of their power. Young clan leader, don't worry, I will definitely do a good job of this. That's good. Finally, looking at the cheering clan members, Chen Daoxuan flew towards the Chen family's flying sword factory. After watching Chen Daoxuan leave, Chen Zhi began to settle these Izumo women. After all, with a population of more than 3,000 in the Chen family, it is not an easy task to settle 10,000 Izumo women. It can be predicted that Chen Zhi will be very busy next. Back to Shuanghu Island. For 10 consecutive days, Chen Daoxuan did not immediately devote himself to the production work of the flying sword factory except for his daily practice. Instead, he supervised Chen Zhi and others to place the women of Chuan country. Chen Daoxuan still couldn't believe these hot-blooded men of the Chen family. Even under his supervision, there were still 1 or 2 incidents of Chen's men taking advantage of Chuan women. Chen Daoxuan naturally punished this behavior severely. After all, the purpose of buying these women was to let them reproduce for the Chen family of Shuanghu Island, not to vent the desires of Chen's men. In the future, these women will all be the mothers of the Chen family. How could Chen Daoxuan not protect them? In the final analysis, protecting them is to protect the descendants of the Chen family, and its importance is self-evident. With the arrival of these 10,000 women from Chuan country, the huge Shuanghu Island gradually became full of vitality. At this moment, if someone came to Shuanghu Island, they might mistakenly think that they had come to the country of women. After the arrival of this group of women from Chuan country, the male-to-female ratio of Shuanghu Island also reached the most exaggerated 1 to more than 10, since the ancestor Chen Daoxuan established the family. Chen Daoxuan calculated that, if all these women were assigned to the male members of the Chen family as concubines, each male member of the Chen family would probably have to marry more than 10 women. To be honest, if Chen Daoxuan had not embarked on the path of cultivation in this life, and should not be distracted, he would have been a little envious of the ordinary male members of the clan. Changping County Yamen. Chen Daoxuan looked at the group of Chen children in front of him, turned his head to look at Chen Zhi, and asked, "Are these all children under 10 years old in my Chen family?" Report to the young clan leader. There are a total of 1,039 children under 10 years old in the Chen family. All of them are here. More than 1,000 children, standing in the square of the county Yamen, seemed very crowded, almost sticking to each other. But the conditions are limited at the moment, and Chen Daoxuan has no good venue to be picky. This is already the most suitable place for testing the spiritual roots of the Chen children. When the Chen clan learned that the young clan leader was going to test the spiritual roots of all the Chen children, they were even more excited than seeing 10,000 women from the Izumo kingdom. After all, with so many women from Chuan country marrying into the Chen family, only the male members of the Chen family were happy. Although the female members of the Chen family didn't say it, they still had some opinions about Chen Daoxuan, the young patriarch. Chen Daoxuan decisively chose to ignore the complaints of the female members of the Chen family. The Chen family wanted to grow and develop by relying on the sacrifices of generations of Chen family members. This was the case with the immortal monks, who died in Zen and Xianzheng, and it was also the case with the female members of the Chen family. But then Chen Daoxuan's practice of testing the spiritual roots of the children and the family completely dispelled the dissatisfaction of the female members of the Chen family. Compared with the husband marrying a concubine, the future of their own children is obviously more important. Besides, it is natural for men in this world to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. The female members of the Chen family had even less reason to be dissatisfied. Sitting on the chair prepared by the county government, Chen Daoxuan held the spirit test plate in one hand, injected a stream of true energy, and pointed the spirit test plate at the child in front of him. No spiritual roots. Next one. After half an hour of testing, Chen Daoxuan was basically numb. After testing hundreds of Chen children, only a few with spiritual roots were found, and all of them were lower spiritual roots. It was impossible for Chen Daoxuan to say that he was not disappointed. But he knew that this was the current situation of the birth of spiritual roots among mortals. 1 in 100, and most of them were of medium and lower spiritual roots. The next person who came to him was a timid little girl. Perhaps after testing more than 100 Chen children in a row, not a single one had spiritual roots. Chen Daoxuan's face was not very good, and the little girl was a little scared. Seeing this scene, Chen Daoxuan forced a smile on his face. Don't be nervous. Yeah. The little girl mustered up her courage and nodded vigorously. The next second, the spiritual light of the spirit test plate enveloped the little girl. Yeah? Chen Daoxuan didn't care much in his heart, but he didn't expect that the little girl in front of him gave him a great surprise. Upper spiritual roots. Chen Daoxuan looked at the little girl with surprise. At this moment, he looked at the little girl's appearance seriously. The girl was about 8 or 9 years old, with dry hair and a pale face. She was wearing coarse cloth, and looked like she came from a poor family. Seeing this, Chen Daoxuan was afraid of scaring the little girl, so he tried to make his voice gentle and said, "Little sister, what's your name?" Seeing Chen Daoxuan's attitude, the little girl secretly raised her head, then quickly lowered it, and said timidly in a voice as thin as a mosquito, "My name is Chen Lian." Chen Lian, Chen Daolian, a good name, a good name, ha 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 ha. Chen Daoxuan laughed happily. Chen Lian didn't know why the young patriarch, who was repeatedly told by her parents to be careful with her words, was so happy. But she knew that this was a good thing for her. Chen Zhi and several Chen children who were found to have lower spiritual roots standing by were also looking at Chen Lian with envy. They knew that the fate of this little girl would be completely changed from now on. "Chen Lian, come here and sit next to me." Chen Daoxuan waved to the little girl. Chen Lian bravely sat down on Chen Daoxuan's wide chair. Seeing her like this, Chen Daoxuan didn't care and continued to test the remaining children's spiritual roots. But after testing hundreds of people, except for 1 middle spiritual root and 3 lower spiritual root immortal seedlings, there was no upper spiritual root immortal seedling like Chen Lian. Chen Daoxuan knew that this was the real probability of the birth of spiritual roots. Chen's family had only more than 3,000 people, and only he and Chen Lian had upper spiritual roots, which was considered very lucky. After all, the probability of having upper spiritual roots in the cultivator group was less than 1 in 10. Chapter 57, Rice Bucket Technique. It took half a day. The first large-scale screening of Chen family immortal seedlings, since Chen Ziyan took charge of the Chen family for 50 years ended. Changping County Government Office. Looking at the 8 children in front of him, the oldest was 10 years old and the youngest was no more than 5 years old, Chen Daoxuan was filled with emotion. In fact, he knew that there must be immortal seedlings hidden among the adult group of the Chen family. But compared with these children under 10 years old, the cost effectiveness of cultivating adult immortal seedlings is too low. Chen Daoxuan decisively chose to give up. Chen Daolian and the other 8, plus Chen Daochu who has been practicing in Chen Daoxuan's cave, the cultivators of the Chen family, or the future cultivators, finally broke through the double digits and reached 11 people. Of course, in order to make these 9 little guys truly become cultivators in the key refining stage, they must establish a family spiritual vein. Otherwise, when they enter the key refining stage and find that they do not have enough spiritual energy to practice, it will be a lot of fun. Chen Daoxuan is confident about this. If nothing unexpected happens, the first spiritual vein of the Chen family can be cultivated within half a year at the latest. Chen Daoxuan's confidence still comes from the trade with the mermaids. It must be said that the market of the mermaids is more than 100 times smaller than the large number of independent cultivators in Guanghan Prefecture. But at the same time, selling a first level inferior flying sword to independent cultivators can only earn a gross profit of 19 spirit stones, not counting the taxes collected by the Zhao family in Guanghan Prefecture. However, trading with the mermaids can earn 469 spirit stones, which is more than 20 times higher. So it seems. Although the mermaid market is not as large as the Guanghan Prefecture market, it is also a very important market for the Chen family. Especially for the current Chen family. The number of magic tools required by the mermaids is small and the profit is large, which is perfect for the Chen family. Red Copper Mountains. Chen Daoxuan's cave. A group of 9 people, riding the wind, slowly flew towards the direction of the cave. When everyone landed, Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. This was the first time he used the wind control technique to carry so many people to fly, but fortunately nothing went wrong. This is where you will stay for the next few years. Chen Daoxuan turned around and said to the group of children behind him. It may be that the living environment is much worse than in the previous life, and the children in this world are much more mature than the children of the same age in the previous life. Therefore, when hearing this, even the youngest 5-year-old child did not cry. Seeing this, Chen Daoxuan nodded with satisfaction. Perhaps he heard the movement outside the cave. A young figure holding a long sword rushed out of the cave. It was Chen Daoxuan, who had not seen for several months. Chen Daoxuan was a tiger. When he saw Chen Daoxuan, he was stunned at first, and then immediately pointed the sword downwards, and bowed to Chen Daoxuan and said, "Meet the young clan leader." Seeing Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, "Daoxuan, you came at the right time. I will introduce a few clan members to you. From now on, you will live together and learn to get along well. Do you understand?" "Yes, young clan leader." The children looked at each other and then answered in unison, "Yes." Chen Daoxuan nodded and asked them to introduce themselves. Everyone was of the same age. Even the oldest, Chen Daoxuan, was only 6 years older than the 10-year-old child. After the introduction, everyone quickly became familiar with each other. "Brother Daoxuan, my father told me that you are the son of Director Chen, right? Brother Daoxuan, how long have you been practicing here? What is the life of an immortal like?" Brother Daoxuan. Everyone was quite in awe of Chen Daoxuan and dared not disturb him easily, but they were much closer to Chen Daoxuan, who was of the same age. Chen Daoxuan patiently explained the life in Chitang Mountain to everyone. Finally, they had a certain understanding of the environment of the cave house in Chitang Mountain. He settled the 8 Chen family immortal seedlings in the cave house. Chen Daoxuan walked into his own practice room. In the past 10 days, he first settled the female slaves of Izumo country, and then organized the selection of Chen family immortal seedlings, which made Chen Daoxuan very tired. Back in the cave house, Chen Daoxuan just wanted to fall on the bed and take a deep sleep. But the habit he had developed over the years still made him drag his tired body to the spiritual eye in the training room. He opened the stone cover that sealed the spiritual eye. A large amount of spiritual energy suddenly came out, but the perceptive Chen Daoxuan still found that the spiritual energy coming out of this spiritual eye had become less. Seeing this scene, Chen Daoxuan's face darkened. Back then, the immortal generation of the family discovered a total of 7 spiritual eyes in the Red Copper Mountains. This spiritual eye is the least used one among them. Now it is time for the spiritual energy to gradually dry up. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan felt a little uncomfortable. After all, this spiritual eye has accompanied him for a full 11 years of cultivation. It can be said that Chen Daoxuan's current cultivation is all thanks to this spiritual eye. But now, this spiritual eye is about to dry up. It's not that he is worried about not having spiritual energy to practice. Chen Daoxuan just feels that it is a little difficult to accept emotionally. He now finally understands the lonely expression of Chen Xian when he heard that the red copper vein was exhausted. It was not the reluctance to the exhaustion of cultivation resources, but the feeling of the passing years. How can you see the rainbow without going through the wind and rain? And how can you become a butterfly without breaking the cocoon? Chen Daoxuan quickly adjusted his mentality and smiled slightly. Unconsciously, his Taoism became more determined. He took out a water spirit bead from the storage bag and took another key gathering pill. After more than a month, Chen Daoxuan felt the violent speed of cultivation again, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. The next day, after silently reciting the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra and storing a stardust in the sea of consciousness, Chen Daoxuan opened his eyes after a night of cultivation. Feeling the true key and the Danshan circling in the slightly stronger sea of key, Chen Daoxuan smiled with satisfaction. It seemed that he thought of something. Chen Daoxuan took out a jade slip from the storage bag. This jade slip was not something else, but the body training method he bought at the Zhao's auction house in Guang'an Prefecture, Dragon Python Swallowing the Sky. In the more than 1 month since he got this technique, Chen Daoxuan had already understood it thoroughly with the help of the sudden enlightenment characteristics of the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra. Speaking of which, the difficulty of practicing this body refining technique is quite low. It is not even much higher than the return to origin technique that Chen Daoxuan mainly practices. You should know that the return to origin technique that Chen Daoxuan mainly practices is the most popular basic key refining technique in the Kainyuan sword sect, which is most suitable for key refining disciples to lay the foundation. Although the return to origin technique has no attribute bonus, it is better in that the technique is positive and peaceful, and the difficulty of practice is low. When the cultivator successfully builds the foundation, no matter what technique he switches to, there will not be too much obstacles. Therefore, this technique is the most widely spread in the Huangxing Sea, and is the technique that most key refining cultivators practice. And now, Chen Daoxuan found that the difficulty of practicing this dragon python swallowing the sky technique is comparable to the return to origin technique, which makes him feel like he has found a treasure. According to the description of the dragon python swallowing heaven technique, the biggest consumption of this technique is not spiritual energy, but various precious ingredients, such as monster meat, spiritual rice, spiritual fruits, etc. Chen Daoxuan looked at the introduction on the jade slip and felt a bit amused. Why do I feel that this is not a body refining technique, but a glutton technique? It really deserves the name of swallowing heaven. Chapter 58 The Pros and Cons of Body Refining Techniques. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan practiced the dragon python swallowing heaven technique again. He had a hunch that he would be able to thoroughly master this technique today. Sure enough, as this body refining technique was running, Chen Daoxuan's stomach and intestines began to wriggle wildly, followed by a strong sense of hunger. This hunger was so fierce that it almost drowned his clear consciousness. Since Chen Daoxuan reached the key refining stage and was able to practice fasting, he had never felt such a strong sense of hunger. It seemed that, if he didn't eat, he would starve to death in the next second. Fortunately, Chen Daoxuan was well prepared. He immediately took out a fist-sized piece of roasted monster meat from the storage bag and chewed it. The blood-spotted sea snake was tender, but after all, it had been stored in the storage bag for several months, and the taste was definitely not as fresh as when it was just hunted. But at this moment, Chen Daoxuan, who had been starving for a long time, didn't care about the taste at all. He chewed the pieces of monster roast meat roughly twice and swallowed them down. In less than an incense stick of time, Chen Daoxuan's small stomach was filled with at least several hundred kilograms of blood-spotted sea snake barbecue. You know, this is not ordinary poultry and livestock, it is monster meat. The energy contained in its meat is difficult for ordinary people, even key refining cultivators to digest. However, after Chen Daoxuan ate so many kilograms of meat, his stomach did not change except for a slight bulge. Burp. After eating another half an incense stick, Chen Daoxuan burped. He felt that he could not eat anymore. Gurgle. Gurgle. A dull roar suddenly sounded in the training room, like thunder. Chen Daoxuan knew that this was the sound of his stomach and intestines frantically digesting the blood-spotted sea snake barbecue. As the monster barbecue in his stomach was digested bit by bit, a heat flow that was completely different from the true qi flowed out of his stomach and quickly circulated throughout his body. Among them, the place where the heat flow gathered the most was his skin membrane. Chen Daoxuan only felt that his skin membrane was tempered bit by this heat flow, and the strength of the skin membrane was also visibly enhanced. Although the enhanced physical defense is completely incomparable to that of magic weapons, if it can be strengthened like this, Chen Daoxuan believes that one day he will be able to reach the level of physical resistance to magic weapons, as the old man in the auction house said. Moreover, Chen Daoxuan discovered another benefit of the body refining method. That is to increase the success rate of the cultivator's foundation building. As we all know, in addition to the foundation building pill, the cultivator needs at least the second level spiritual vein to assist in the foundation building. Why do these two resources are needed? It is because during the foundation building process, the true ki of the cultivator will transform into true essence. Compared with the docile true ki in the sea of ki at ordinary times, when breaking through the foundation building period, the transformation of the true ki of the cultivator into true essence will cause the sea of ki to expand violently. At this time, the docility of the true essence becomes particularly important. The role of the foundation building pill is to make the transformed true essence of the cultivator become extremely docile, directly crossing the difficulty of the expansion of the sea of ki. The second biggest difficulty in building the foundation is the infusion of spiritual energy. Because the true ki transforms into true essence and the expansion of the sea of ki, it is necessary to consume terrifying spiritual energy in a short period of time. At this time, unless it is a spiritual vein of the second level or above, it is impossible to support the cultivator's breakthrough. But at the same time, the infusion of spiritual energy will bring another problem, that is, whether the cultivator's body can withstand the damage caused by the infusion of spiritual energy. Some cultivators have clearly passed the difficulty of the expansion of the sea of ki, but they fell under the level of the infusion of spiritual energy. This is a disaster caused by the insufficient strength of the cultivator's physical body. This is also the reason why the children of the big families have to eat spiritual rice all year round. Spiritual rice has the effect of warming the body and improving the strength of the body. If you eat it for a long time, when you build your foundation in the future, you will not have the situation where you have clearly passed the most dangerous transformation of the sea of ki, but fell under the infusion of spiritual energy. And practicing the body refining method obviously brings more improvement to the cultivator's physical body than long-term consumption of spiritual rice. Not only that, the improvement of the cultivator's physical body will even speed up the cultivator's cultivation speed to a certain extent. Because the total amount of spiritual energy that the cultivator refines every day is fixed, exceeding this amount will cause damage to the cultivator's physical body. But what if the cultivator's physical body strength is improved? At that time, the total amount of spiritual energy that the cultivators can refine will definitely increase, and the speed of cultivation will also increase accordingly. Of course, all of this is based on the premise that the cultivators can withstand the consumption brought by body refining. Just now, Chen Daoxuan only practiced for less than 2 incense sticks, and he swallowed hundreds of pounds of monster barbecue. You know, the blood-spotted sea snake, skinned and boned, and then removed the inedible meat. The remaining good meat added up to more than 2,000 pounds. Chen Daoxuan ate 1/10 of it in a moment. According to the market price, he ate at least 10 spirit stones in a moment. This is only the time of practicing for 2 incense sticks. At this speed of practice, at full power, he will eat at least 40 to 50 spirit stones of food a day. If it is replaced with spirit rice, it may be more expensive. Which cultivation force can afford this kind of training? Let alone the Zhao family of Guanghan Prefecture. Carnian Sword Sect can't afford this kind of consumption, right? After all, Carnian Sword Sect has countless resources, but the number of disciples is also the best in Wangxinghai. In such a large sect, if everyone eats like this, even the richest families will be bankrupted. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan's original plan to let all the Chen family cultivators practice body refining techniques fell through. He estimated that in the future, only the children of elite families could practice body refining techniques. As for the other ordinary family cultivators, the Chen family probably couldn't afford to support them. Shaking his head, Chen Daoxuan didn't think about it anymore. He stood up and stretched, and his bones burst into crackling sounds. He walked out of the cave. On the small square on the cliff, Chen Daoxuan found that Chen Daochu had brought the other 8 immortal seedlings of the Dao generation. to practice swordsmanship facing the rising sun. Chen Daoxuan watched silently without interrupting them. Although he had only practiced for a few months, Chen Daoxuan had already broken through to the 4th level of the acquired realm. This shows a huge gap between people with spiritual roots and ordinary mortals. This was when Chen Daoxuan didn't have enough resources for practice. If the Chen family buys Tang Meidan for the spiritual root disciples in the family, they can even open up the meridians of the whole body overnight, transcend the mortal realm, and directly enter the key refining stage. The reason why Chen Daoxuan did not do this is that the family's spiritual veins have not been successfully cultivated. Even if everyone enters the key refining stage, there is not enough spiritual energy to practice. It is better to study and practice now to hone your mind. Chen Daoxuan, didn't you eat enough? Your hands are shaking so badly? Chen Daoxuan saw that the long sword in Chen Daoxuan's hand was trembling, and he was standing unsteadily. He immediately put on the appearance of a little adult and scolded. Chen Daoxuan felt very aggrieved by what he said, and tears rolled in her eyes, but she gritted her teeth and resisted. What others can do, Chen Daoxuan can do. Chen Daoxuan watched from the side, and nodded secretly in his heart. Chen Daoxuan looks timid, but she is a person with a soft outer and a strong inner character. This kind of character is very conducive to practice. Watching everyone practice swordsmanship for a while, seeing that there was no major problem with what Chen Daoxuan taught, Chen Daoxuan did not come out to greet everyone, but flew directly towards the flying sword factory. Chapter 59 Expanding the Transaction. Time flies. In a blink of an eye, 3 months have passed. In the southwest of the Huangxing Sea, about 10,000 miles away from the Chen family of Xuanhu Island, there is the Demonate Mountain under the sea. Looking around, a large group of mermaids are opening caves everywhere in this mountain range. Demonate Mountain Range. In the most spacious cave, a strong male mermaid with bronze muscles all over his body is silently regulating his breath in the cave. Judging from his disordered breath, he is obviously seriously injured. Father. A petite figure suddenly broke into the cave. The petite mermaid was holding a spiritual medicine full of spiritual energy in her hand, and said excitedly, "Look, Lua has found a spiritual medicine that can treat father's injuries." Hearing this call, the chief of the merman tribe slowly opened his eyes, looked at the elixir in his daughter's hand, and a trace of heartache appeared in his eyes. "Lua, you have worked hard during this period." Who knew that? Luoli shook his head constantly when he heard this. "Father, please don't say that. You fought with the leader of the water demon ape at the risk of your life for the sake of a safe territory for your people. Compared to you, what is this little thing Lua did?" Hearing Luoli mention the life and death battle with the leader of the water demon ape, even though this battle had been over for almost half a year, the chief of the merman tribe still felt a little scared every time he thought about it. It was almost, just a little bit. He and the leader of the water demon ape died together. Thinking of this, the chief of the merman tribe was relieved. "Speaking of which, I was able to defeat the leader of the water demon ape, all thanks to you and your people who took the lead in defeating the water demon ape tribe and came to support me. Otherwise, I would have had no choice but to die with that guy." Hearing his father say this, Luoli felt a little embarrassed. "I didn't expect that there would be such a big difference in strength between the tribesmen with weapons and without weapons." As if thinking of the scene where the mermaids were holding magic weapons and were unstoppable in the water demon ape tribe, Luoli's excited face flushed. "Father, we must buy more weapons for this transaction with the Chen family of Xuanhu Island. You and I are thinking the same thing." The mermaid tribe leader smiled, but then seemed to think of something else, and frowned slightly. "But, I remember that the tribesmen have not brought many spiritual stones." Hearing this, Luoli's excitement stagnated, but in an instant, he thought of something else and said happily, "It doesn't matter. Last time, the Chen family member named Chen Daoxuan gave me an illustrated guide of various spiritual minerals and spiritual medicines. We can use these things to exchange weapons with them." Hearing this, the mermaid tribe leader's expression eased a little. He said, "Luoli, this transaction with the Chen family is very important. We must not make any mistakes. Although we have occupied the Demonate Mountain, we have not yet established a firm foothold. In addition, I'm seriously injured now and can't help you at all. If you want to protect the tribe, you can only strengthen the tribe's strength, and buying weapons for the tribe is the fastest way to strengthen the strength. Father, Eluoli will definitely do this, don't worry. Eluoli smiled. Chuanghu Island. Cave in the Red Copper Mountain Range. Chen Daoxuan opened his eyes again, and said with surprise, 5th level of Ki refining. Feeling the 30% increase in the true Ki and the Danshan Ki C, Chen Daoxuan was very excited. In less than half a year, he broke through the 4th level of Ki refining, and broke through to the 5th level of Ki refining again. This cultivation speed is not slower than the core children of the big family. Chen Daoxuan knew. In addition to the water spirit pearl and the Ki gathering pill, to assist in his practice, the body refining effect of dragon python swallowing heaven also contributed to his rapid cultivation. He could clearly feel that as his body became stronger, the total amount of spiritual energy he refined every day was also slowly increasing, which undoubtedly accelerated his cultivation speed. The only pity was that his blood-spotted sea snake meat had been eaten up. Without the resources for body refining, the progress of practicing dragon python swallowing the sky was shockingly slow. In addition, in recent times, Chen Daoxuan has clearly felt that the spiritual eye in the practice room is no longer enough to support his high-speed practice. The problem of insufficient spiritual energy was once again placed in front of Chen Daoxuan. In the 3 months since returning to Xuanhu Island, Chen Daoxuan has not rested for a day. The busy hours every day are more terrifying than working overtime in the factory in his previous life. At least in his previous life, he had time to sleep when working overtime. But now, Chen Daoxuan is busy every day except for daily practice. During the day, he rushed to make the red shadow flying sword in the flying sword factory, working for about 5 hours. In the evening, after checking the work of Chen Zhi and others, he returned to the cave to personally teach Chen's 8 immortal seedlings to practice, which took him another 2 or 3 hours. In addition to the 4 hours of practice every day's schedule is full, without a single gap. However, watching the family grow and develop little by little in his hands, this kind of satisfaction is also difficult for outsiders to understand. In addition to the stable daily output of flying swords in the flying sword factory, what makes Chen Daoxuan most excited during this period is that Chen Daoxuan is also a high-level spiritual root immortal seedling. According to this calculation, although there are only 11 cultivators in the Chen family, there are 3 high-level spiritual roots. It must be said that the luck is very good. Normally, in order to give birth to 3 high-level spiritual root cultivators, at least dozens of spiritual root cultivators are needed. After a night of practice, Chen Daoxuan stood up and walked out of the cave. Walking out of the cave, seeing that 8 Chen family immortal seedlings were already practicing swords in the small square outside the cave, Chen Daoxuan did not disturb them and flew directly towards the direction of Redwood Island. That's right. He was absent from work today and did not go to the flying sword factory because he had contacted Eluoli of the mermaid tribe yesterday. Today was the day for his second transaction with the mermaid tribe. Compared with the first hasty transaction, the scale of this transaction is obviously much larger. Not only that, last time, Chen Daoxuan gave the mermaids a collection of rare treasures such as spiritual minerals and spiritual medicines. I think there should be a lot of unexpected gains this time. At the very least, he has to find the mermaids to buy a batch of water spirit beads. After such a long time of cultivating with the assistance of water spirit beads, he feels that he can no longer do without this thing. After all, after feeling the charm of high-speed cultivation, who would be willing to return to the slow state of cultivation in the past? Chen Daoxuan estimated. If his water spirit beads, spiritual pills and other cultivation resources are always sufficient, he is sure to reach the 9th level of Ki refining before the age of 20. Although there is still a gap compared to Zhao Mubei's foundation building at the age of 21. But this cultivation speed is probably enough to scare others among the casual cultivators and the children of small families. Redwood Island. Compared with the slightly complex terrain of Xuanhu Island, such as plains, lakes, and mountains, the pattern of Redwood Island is much clearer. There is only a large plain and a series of freshwater lakes. The entire island seems to have no much scenery except for the large redwood forest. If such an island were placed on Earth, it would definitely be a treasure island. The island is rich in land resources, forest resources, and freshwater resources, making it very suitable for human habitation. But in this world, the lack of spiritual veins alone means that it is destined to become a deserted island with no one living on it. Chen Daoxuan landed on the island again. He looked around. He flew towards the north of the island. Chapter 60, Shortage of Spiritual Stones. Heading north, Chen Daoxuan stopped over the reefs where he had traded last time. Looking at the endless sea, Chen Daoxuan slowly lowered his body. I always trade with the mermaids while standing, which seems a bit tense. Chen Daoxuan said silently. Trading with the mermaids is a long-term business for the Chen family, and it is definitely not something that will be abandoned after 1 or 2 orders. Chen Daoxuan also wants to use the power of the mermaids to open the treasures of the underwater world of Wangxinghe. He will never give up the mermaid market. Since he doesn't want to give up, it is very important to have a good relationship with the other party. Fortunately, during the last transaction, the mermaids had a good impression of him. This time, the transaction should not have the tit-for-tat scene when they first met. Why not build a pavilion on the sea here? He looked at the underwater reefs. The most protruding part has extended to the sea surface, which is enough to serve as the foundation of the pavilion. Do it as soon as you say it. Chen Daoxuan patted his storage bag and took out the red shadow flying sword. With the infusion of true energy, the 3-foot-long sword light shone through his body. Swish. Under the control of his spiritual consciousness, the red shadow flying sword slashed towards the reef on the seabed. Soon, a huge reef as white as jade was cut into 2 pieces by the red shadow flying sword. The broken part of the reef was as smooth as jade, and there was no trace of cutting at all. Chen Daoxuan nodded with satisfaction, and continued to control the flying sword, to cut along the stone. According to the idea in his mind, Chen Daoxuan kept polishing the reef stone in front of him with the flying sword. Half an hour later, a roughly made pavilion was built by Chen Daoxuan, and stood on the reef foundation on the sea. From a distance, the pavilion seemed to float on the sea. If you ignore its rough workmanship, it looks quite interesting. Stepping into the pavilion, Chen Daoxuan looked around, and felt that something was missing. He took out another piece of stone from the seabed, and after several efforts, he made a stone table and 2 stone benches. Then, Chen Daoxuan used the fire control technique to evaporate the water stains in the pavilion. Under the cover of water vapor, this pavilion on the sea was like a fairyland in a dream. I always feel that it's not good enough. Chen Daoxuan touched his chin and muttered. Immediately, he took off into the air, flew around the pavilion for several circles, and finally found something missing. I didn't give you a name. Chen Daoxuan's eyes lit up slightly and smiled. With a burst of sword light flying, in the blink of an eye, the 3 big characters Guanhei Pavilion appeared above the stone pavilion. From the decision to build this pavilion to the pavilion being built, it took him less than an hour. This kind of work efficiency is extremely terrifying even in the previous life. But Chen Daoxuan knew that this was the power of the cultivator. The power of the cultivator is not only reflected in its powerful destructive power, but also in its powerful productivity. For example, the spiritual field that only cultivators can cultivate. If ordinary mortals were asked to plant spiritual fields, even if they put in a lot of effort, they would not be able to plant even 1 acre of spiritual fields. Because spiritual rice is different from ordinary rice. Its rice stalks are extremely tough, and cultivators must hold magic tools to cut them, not to mention the more difficult work of shelling. Therefore, even the cultivator group must learn specifically before they can plant spiritual fields. Among the cultivator group, cultivators who can plant spiritual fields are called spiritual plant husbands. Although this profession is not as popular as alchemists, weapon refiners, array masters, and talisman makers, it is considered to be a tall, rich and handsome man in the casual cultivator group. The spiritual stones earned by spiritual plant husbands in a year are at least several times higher than those earned by casual cultivators who know nothing. Of course, in Guanghan Prefecture, since casual cultivators basically have no spiritual veins, even if they know the skill of planting spiritual fields, they can only be tenants for the immortal cultivators. With the exploitation of the immortal cultivators in Wangxinghe, these spiritual plant husbands can't earn a few spiritual stones all year round. This also greatly reduces the interest of casual cultivators in learning to plant spiritual fields. Late at night, after waiting for a whole day, the mermaids finally arrived. As expected, this time Eluoli came alone. As for the men she brought with her, she arranged them all in the reefs on the seabed. Unlike last time, she did not directly let a group of mermaid strongmen surround Chen Daoxuan and try to intimidate him with momentum. Chen Daoxuan, here I come. Eluoli, who emerged from the sea, looked at the stone pavilion built by Chen Daoxuan with some surprise, and finally jumped up and sat on the stone bench. Seeing this scene, Chen Daoxuan felt a little curious. He looked down at Eluoli, who knew that, before he could see clearly, he was caught by the other party. Eluoli looked at him strangely, tilting her head and saying, "What are you looking at?" "Ahem, nothing." Chen Daoxuan covered up awkwardly, then smiled and said, "We meet again, Miss Eluoli." Seeing him like this, Eluoli was puzzled, but did not ask too many questions. Then she thought of something. She looked at the pavilion, looked at Chen Daoxuan, and said, "Did you build this pavilion?" "Yes." Chen Daoxuan nodded. "It's really ugly." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan showed an embarrassed but polite smile on his face. Seeing him like this, Eluoli covered her mouth and chuckled. "But you are quite attentive." "Of course I have to be attentive. After all, you, the mermaids, are a big customer of my Chen family," Chen Daoxuan said with a smile. After a few polite words, Chen Daoxuan got down to business and said, "Miss Eluo, how many flying swords are you going to buy this time?" Hearing Chen Daoxuan talking about business, Eluoli also sat up straight and said, "Of course, the more the better. The weapons you sold to us last time were very good, but the quantity was a bit too small. This time we want to buy more weapons." After a pause, she added, "We want as many as you can get." Hearing this inhumane remark, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but be overjoyed. After a moment of silence, Chen Daoxuan slapped his storage bag. I saw flying swords overflowing with spiritual light piled up in the pavilion until they formed a small mountain. Seeing the flying swords under her feet, Eluoli's beautiful eyes were filled with greed like a little money grubber seeing gold ingots. She took a deep breath and said, "There are many more flying swords this time than last time." "That's right," Chen Daoxuan nodded. "This time we have more time to prepare, and with sufficient materials, the number is indeed several times more than last time. There are a total of 350 flying swords here." Hearing this, Eluoli's pretty face flashed a trace of embarrassment. "What's wrong, Miss Eluo? Do you have any questions?" Chen Daoxuan saw that she looked strange and pretended to be concerned. Eluoli shook her head and then said, "By the way, didn't you say last time that you can use spiritual ore to pay off the debt? This time, the spiritual stones we prepared may not be enough. See if you can use spiritual ore to pay off." At the end of speaking, Eluoli's voice became lower and lower. Chen Daoxuan's heart sank when he heard this. This time he was still hoping to quickly earn 100,000 spiritual stones from the mermaid tribe and return to Xuanghu Island to cultivate spiritual veins. Unexpectedly, things seemed to have changed again. Thinking of this, he said calmly, "I wonder how many spiritual stones Miss Eluo can take out this time." Chapter 61 Negotiating the Price. Hearing this, Eluoli first stretched out a white and tender little hand, and then stretched out another one, and said carefully, 100,000 spirit stones a little more. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. Enough. 100,000 spirit stones will do. The Chen family currently has 2,000 spirit stones in the warehouse, plus these 100,000 spirit stones. It is enough to cultivate a spirit vein for the Chen family. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan said in a relaxed tone, "Of course, no problem. I wonder what spirit ores Miss Eluo brought." Seeing that Chen Daoxuan was not angry, but looked kind and easy to talk to, Eluoli's affection for him became even stronger, and she felt a little embarrassed. She opened her red lips slightly, and a melodious song came out of her little mouth. Soon, one after another, the mermaids floated out of the sea, and they were the men brought by Eluoli. Like last time, these mermaids all held huge white shells. The white shells were filled with spirit stones, spirit ores, spirit beads and other rare treasures. Eluoli turned his back and clapped his hands to the tribesmen in the sea. The mermaids lined up and opened the white giant shells in their hands. The next second, the sea surface was shining with spiritual light, which was dazzling. Looking at the spiritual stones and spiritual ores in front of him, Chen Daoxuan felt that his blood was surging, and his face flushed slightly. Seeing his useless look, Eluoli couldn't help showing a trace of pride on her pretty face. Finally, she didn't have to feel shy about her loss of composure just now. Thinking of this, Eluoli happily introduced, "This is the Gishu Jingjin you mentioned last time. Our tribe has mined the most during this period. This kind of stone." Chen Daoxuan looked in the direction of Eluoli's finger. The Gishu Jingjin ore, which was the size of an adult's fist, was piled up in the white giant shells, exuding an amazing spiritual charm. On the side, Eluoli continued to introduce, "This is another kind of stone we found on the seabed. Red copper ore." For Chen Daoxuan, whose family had owned red copper veins, this kind of spiritual ore was very familiar to him. As a first-class spiritual ore, red copper ore is widely distributed in Huangsing Sea and Xianan continent, second only to spiritual ore such as black iron ore. Chen Daoxuan was not surprised to find such spiritual ore on the seabed. "Yes, it is red copper ore." Eluoli nodded. "This red copper ore is the raw material for you to make weapons, right?" Although the mermaids do not know how to refine weapons, they still have the ability to distinguish spiritual charm. After all, they also have spiritual consciousness. "Yes." Chen Daoxuan nodded without concealing. Eluoli nodded with satisfaction at his sincere attitude and said, "Since this stone is the raw material for you to refine weapons, the price should be very high. Tell me, how much should it be worth?" Eluoli immediately put on a look of a little money grubber. Chen Daoxuan frowned and said, "In Guanghan Prefecture, the price of red copper ore is 3 spiritual stones per kati. What price do you think is appropriate to sell it to me?" Ah. Hearing this price, Eluoli was a little dumbfounded. How could this be? Gishu Jingjin only needs a few pieces to exchange for a weapon. Why is this kind of stone so cheap? The price difference between the two is dozens of times. This made Eluoli wonder if Chen Daoxuan was deceiving herself. Seeing that Eluoli didn't speak, Chen Daoxuan coughed and explained, "Miss Eluoli, do you know how difficult it is for us humans to refine a weapon?" As he said, he sighed, "Just say the slowest level first grade inferior flying sword. It takes a cultivator like me who is proficient in refining weapons to spend a full 7 days to complete. Mining for you mermaids shouldn't be so hard, right?" "What?" Hearing that it takes 7 days to refine a weapon, Eluoli was speechless. This is too hard. In this way, mining for their people is much easier. Thinking of this, Eluoli felt a little embarrassed. After all, she also knew that digging stones does not require much technical content. It is just a physical job. And male mermaids are not like female mermaids, who can raise spirit shells. Male mermaids can't do anything, just stupid strength. With this calculation, the mermaids only need to make a little effort to exchange for the Chen family's weapons, which is a huge profit. Seeing Eluoli's guilty look, Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. It was a close call. This girl actually got it. He just deliberately ignored the value of the spiritual ore itself and shifted the perspective of value to the labor paid by both parties. It can be said that it is a sophistry. Fortunately, Eluoli did not find anything wrong. Perhaps in Eluoli's eyes, this broken stone has no value at all. The spiritual beads produced by the spiritual shells they raised can at least decorate the cave. What's the use of this broken stone? It can't be eaten or used, and it looks ugly. If Chen Daoxuan hadn't specifically asked for these broken stones, the mermaids would not have taken them seriously. As if she felt guilty for suspecting Chen Daoxuan just now, Eluoli's tone of voice was a little gentler. "This is the biggest specialty of our mermaids, the water spirit beads." Eluoli pointed to the water spirit beads held in the hands of the tribesman, and her tone suddenly became sad. Chen Daoxuan knew that the mermaids had been persecuted by the Zhao family for hundreds of years because of this water spirit bead. Chen Daoxuan was not in a good position to persuade them. After all, he and the Zhao family belonged to the same human race. It was quite reasonable for Eluoli not to hate him. "I wonder how much this water spirit bead can be sold for." Eluoli raised his head and looked at Chen Daoxuan. After a moment of hesitation, Chen Daoxuan looked at Luoli's eyes and said carefully, the price of a first level water spirit bead in Guang'an Prefecture is 50 spirit stones. I wonder what price Miss Luo is willing to give me. He said 50 spirit stones, and Luoli would definitely not give a price higher than this. In fact, although the water spirit bead sold by the Zhao family is 50 spirit stones per piece, ordinary casual cultivators and children of small families have no channels to buy it. This kind of treasure that assists cultivation has long been reserved by the big families in Guang'an Prefecture and even other prefectures in Kangzhou. Even if some leftovers fall into the hands of casual cultivators, they will often be sold at a high price. For example, last time Chen Daoxuan was in the casual cultivator market, he spent twice the premium to buy a few water spirit beads. When Luoli heard that 10 water spirit beads could be exchanged for a weapon, she couldn't help but feel guilty about this horrible price. She hesitated and couldn't speak for a long time. In fact, she wanted to say that she would sell it for 50 spirit stones, but when she heard that Chen Daoxuan had worked hard for 7 days to make a weapon, and they, the mermaids, could only exchange it for 10 spirit beads, the condemnation of her conscience made Luoli very uneasy. For a long time, Luoli, who was struggling in her heart, raised her head and said solemnly, Chen Daoxuan, you are a conscientious person. Since your Chen family treats my mermaids sincerely, we can't make money from you against our conscience. We will sell you this water spirit bead for 10 spirit stones each. Hearing this price, Chen Daoxuan almost lost his seat and fell off the stone bench. Si estás escuchando esta novela en canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas. Significa que descargaran y subirán sin esfuerzo te invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas y encontrarás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos géneros. Te esperamos para sumergirte en mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 62 Proposal and Planning. This Chen Daoxuan knew that he seemed to have fooled this silly girl. Looking at the sincere look on Luoli's pretty face, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but feel a little guilty. But soon, this guilt was thrown away by him. He glanced at Luoli, and then at the large amount of rare treasures brought by the mermaids. A bolder idea emerged in his heart. Chen Daoxuan's thoughts were floating in his mind, but his face remained calm. Miss Luo, I feel the sincerity of your mermaids, but 10 spirit stones for 1 water spirit bead, isn't it too? Before Chen Daoxuan finished speaking, Luoli's pretty face flashed a blush. She hesitated and said, I know that 10 spirit stones for 1 water spirit bead is a bit expensive, but it is cheaper than the Zhao family, right? If you still think it is expensive, we can still negotiate. Okay. No need to discuss. Just set this price. Chen Daoxuan waved his hand. He felt that he could not talk to Luoli anymore. If he talked again, he might be able to negotiate the price to 1 spirit stone per bead. Although the Chen family needed to accumulate original capital, they could not cheat the mermaids like this. After all, they had already regarded the mermaids as their own forbidden food. Luoli breathed a sigh of relief when she heard that Chen Daoxuan agreed to the price. For so many years, due to the persecution of the Zhao family, the mermaids never dared to deal with the human race. The little information about the human race was also passed down by word of mouth by the ancestors of the tribe. Luoli knew that Chen Daoxuan made a lot of profit in the transaction between the two sides. But at the same time, the mermaids also obtained the weapons they wanted in the transaction with Chen Daoxuan. In Luoli's view, the transaction between the two sides is a win-win situation. After agreeing on the prices of several spiritual minerals and water spiritual beads, Chen Daoxuan said, since the price is agreed, let's do the deal. Well, okay. Luoli showed 2 small tiger teeth and nodded with a smile. This time we brought a total of 101,756 spiritual stones, as well as various spiritual minerals and spiritual beads, with a value of about 170,000 spiritual stones. In other words, the total value of your goods is 271,756 spiritual stones. Yes. Luoli nodded. Chen Daoxuan continued, I brought a total of 350 flying swords here. According to the price we agreed on, 500 spiritual stones per sword. A total of 175,000 spiritual stones need to be paid. Hearing this, Eluoli was a little embarrassed. It seemed that she brought too much things, and Chen Daoxuan couldn't eat it all. Just when she was in a dilemma, Chen Daoxuan's mind moved slightly, and he smiled and said, "Miss Luo, although this is a second transaction, I wonder what your impression of me is?" Hearing this, Eluoli was stunned at first, then her pretty face blushed, and she turned her head and said, "Not bad. I also have a very good impression and reputation of Miss Luo and the mermaids." He paused, "So I think that our transaction can continue and expand." Expand? Yes, expand. Looking at Eluoli's ignorant look, Chen Daoxuan continued to explain. For example, there are many resources in the deep sea that our human race can use, but your mermaids can't use them, such as this spiritual ore. And our human race also has many things that your mermaids urgently need, such as magic tools. So I think it's better for both sides to have a talk and discuss what resources each other needs. Hearing this, Eluoli was silent for a long time. She raised her head and said, "We mermaids are short of food." What? Chen Daoxuan was almost confused by Eluoli's words. After the cultivators embarked on the path of key refining, they basically fasted without food. The lowest level of the mermaids is the initial stage of the first level, which is equivalent to the initial stage of human key refining cultivators. How could they be short of food? As if seeing Chen Daoxuan's confusion, Eluoli slowly explained, "We mermaids practice differently from you humans. To be honest, our practice is more like that of ancient cultivators." Ancient cultivators. Hearing this word, Chen Daoxuan suddenly realized. Ancient cultivators refer to the group of cultivators in ancient times. In the cultivation world, it does not mean that the current cultivators are inferior to the ancient cultivators. It can only be said that the paths taken by both sides are somewhat different. Ancient cultivators generally practice key refining and body refining at the same time, but the cultivators in ancient times have a characteristic, that is, they do not have magic tools. The ancient cultivators first imitated the path of cultivation of monsters. At that time, the human race was not yet the overlord of this world. Among the myriad races, humans can only be said to be a race that is neither big nor small. But with the emergence of the group of monks, the human race, with its terrifying reproductive ability, quickly grew into the largest race in this world. Later, it became the overlord of this world. Other alien races and monsters either hid in the deep mountains and forests far away from the human race, or hid in the deep sea, not daring to show their heads. With the continuous development of the human cultivation world, the cultivation system began to change. Especially with the emergence of defensive magic tools, the human race discovered that it did not need to spend a lot of energy and resources to refine the body, and the human cultivators could also obtain terrifying defensive power. At this time, the body refining method was gradually banned. Later, the cultivation of immortal arts became more and more prosperous, which led to the current world of immortal cultivation. Eluoli said that the cultivation method of their mermaids tended to be that of ancient monks, and Chen Daoxuan was already very clear about what he meant. "I'm afraid they really lack food. Although there are large groups of monsters on the seabed, monsters are not weak chickens. How can they be so easy to hunt? Besides, monsters appear in groups. The mermaids want to hunt monsters, and the monsters also want to hunt them. This is also the reason why Eluoli and the others were in a hurry to buy weapons." Hearing Eluoli say that they were short of food, Chen Daoxuan proposed a plan that had been brewing in his mind for a long time. "Miss Luo, in addition to the path of key refining, have you also embarked on the path of body refining?" Hearing this, Eluoli nodded at first, and then shook her head. "Our body refining is a little different from your human body refining." At this, she laughed. "We have learned about your human body refining skills, and the consumption of resources is too terrible. The cultivation path of our mermaids is equivalent to a simplified version of the combination of body refining and key refining." Chen Daoxuan didn't know what a simplified version of body refining and key refining was. but thinking about the fact that the leader of the mermaids, a powerful late-stage third order warrior, was almost killed by Zhao Mubei, a cultivator of the first level of the Purple Mansion, it is known that the cultivation method of the mermaids is not very good. After thinking for a while, Chen Daoxuan continued, I think that in addition to weapons, our Chen family can also trade spiritual rice with you mermaids in the future. Spiritual rice? Luoli's eyes lit up slightly. Obviously, she knew what spiritual rice was. Seeing Luoli's happy look, Chen Daoxuan finally showed his true colors and said, since both of us agree to enter into in-depth cooperation, it is very important to have a unified trading currency. Hearing this, Luoli felt a little embarrassed, because the recognized trading currency of the human race is spiritual stones, and all the spiritual stones of their mermaids are already here. Seeing Luoli's embarrassed expression, Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, it doesn't matter if there are no spirit stones. Miss Luo, have you heard of the contribution system in the great families of Immortal Cultivation? What is the contribution system? In simple terms, it means that if the family members hand over spirit stones, spirit mines, spirit beads and other resources to the family, they can obtain the family's contribution points, and then use these contribution points to exchange for spirit stones, spirit beads, spirit mines and other resources. You mean, use the Chen family's contribution points to replace the trading currency between the two sides? Luoli finally reacted and asked. Yes, that's what I mean. Seeing Luoli's hesitation, Chen Daoxuan said, Miss Luo, are you worried about our Chen family? Are you afraid that we will embezzle your things and not admit it? Or, no, I believe you. Luoli hesitated and said, if that's the case, I'm afraid that both parties will forget how many contribution points they have, or that both parties can't explain it clearly. You understand what I mean, right? I understand what Miss Luo means. Chen Daoxuan took out 2 blank jade slips from the storage bag and entered 2 sets of numbers into them respectively. I have entered the number 96,756 on each of these 2 jade slips, which represents 96,756 spirit stones. Chen Daoxuan handed the jade slip to the other party. When you trade with my Chen family in the future, you can use the contribution points in this jade slip to trade with my Chen family. When the time comes, we will deduct the contribution points based on how many spirit stones you spent. Hearing this, Luoli's eyes lit up. She took the jade slip and said with some ill intentions, aren't you afraid that I will change the numbers in this jade slip at will? Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan shook the jade slip in his hand and said, I still have a backup. This kind of transaction model requires both parties to maintain absolute trust, otherwise it will not go on. Our Chen family is willing to trust the mermaids. Hearing Chen Daoxuan's sincere words, Luoli couldn't help but feel ashamed of her cleverness. She raised her head, nodded seriously, and said, since your Chen family is willing to trust our mermaids, we are naturally willing to trust you. At this moment, the relationship between the 2 sides became more harmonious than ever before. Finally, Luoli said in a joking tone, do you want to count the spiritual stones and spiritual minerals? Chen Daoxuan shook his head and said with a smile, I believe you. As if touched by this sentence, Luoli looked at Chen Daoxuan deeply, then turned over and jumped into the sea. Then, the mermaids put down all kinds of supplies and put the flying swords into the white giant shell. Then they jumped into the sea one by one and disappeared. Half a cup of tea later, a beautiful woman floated out of the sea dozens of kilometers away from the Guanhe Pavilion. She looked at the white figure with a clear and elegant figure on the Guanhe Pavilion from a distance, smiled slightly, and disappeared on the sea. Chapter 63. Remarks on the release. It will be available at 12 noon tomorrow. 5 chapters guaranteed. Here are the rules for extra chapters. If the first order exceeds 1,500, 1 chapter will be added for every 100 more. 1 chapter will be added for every 10,000 coins rewarded. 10 chapters for the leader. I've never had a leader, which is a bit miserable, laughing and crying. I've been writing books for a few years, but I don't know if I still have old readers. Maybe it's also related to the fact that I never build a reader group. Confused. Careful readers may have noticed that I switched from the science fiction channel to the fairy tale channel. How can I say about this book? The creative pressure feels a lot less, and I'm finally not afraid of being blocked for stepping on the line. My expectation for this book is to be able to write a novel with more than 2 million words and a stable plot. It can be regarded as a small wish of mine, since I started writing books. Finally, write to yourself, Xiao Bei, come on. Go. Chapter 64, a long cherished wish come true. Back to Xuanhu Island. The sky was already pale. Looking at the rising sun on the sea, Chen Daoxuan touched the storage bags on his waist and was satisfied. The significance of promoting the Chen family's contribution points to the mermaids this time was not just a free-for-all. The greater significance of this move was the financial control of the mermaids. Although the Chen family was still weak now, it had actually gradually controlled the weapons and equipment of the mermaids. In addition to Chen Daoxuan's control over the mermaids' currency, it was bound to control the mermaids' economy in the future. Not to mention that when Chen Daoxuan sold spiritual rice to the mermaids, he would control the mermaids' food. When a force's military, economy, and even food were controlled by another force, outsiders would not believe that it was not a vassal. However, the mermaids did not seem to notice what Chen Daoxuan had done. This was also the drawback of the backwardness of all the systems in this world. Of course, if Chen Daoxuan wanted to completely control the mermaids, he had to make the Chen family's absolute strength surpass that of the other party. Otherwise, others will have the ability to overturn the table at any time, and the worst case scenario is that both sides will suffer losses in the end. Only when the Chen family's hard power exceeds that of the mermaids, this control will be extremely solid, so that they will not have the slightest desire to resist. Just after returning to the flying sword factory on Xuanhu Island, Chen Liangai trotted over and said, "Young patriarch, the patriarch is back." Oh. Hearing that his 13th uncle Chen Zion was back, Chen Daoxuan was slightly stunned, and then he knew what was going on. It must be that the Hongyan flying sword shop in Guanghan Prefecture was too popular, and the 50 flying swords he brought were sold out again. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan smiled and nodded. "I will go to find my 13th uncle now." "Young patriarch," Chen Liangai said carefully. "The patriarch said that you don't need to look for him first. The work of producing flying swords is more important. You can go to him after you finish today's work of refining flying swords." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan laughed dumbly. He knew that Chen Zion was now happy and nervous when he learned that the family had 9 more immortal seedlings. Because the family's spiritual eye could not support the cultivation of so many cultivators in the Chen family, now it has become an urgent matter to cultivate a spiritual vein for the Chen family. After finishing today's work, Chen Daoxuan put the 5 newly refined flying swords into the storage bag, and then used the wind control technique to fly towards Chen Zion's cave in the Red Copper Mountains. Who knew that, after searching for a while, Chen Zion was not in the cave? After thinking about it, he returned to his own cave. Sure enough, outside his cave, Chen Daoxuan found Chen Zion. At this time, he was talking to the 9 immortal seedlings of the Chen family, and there was laughter and joy at the scene. Looking at this happy scene in front of him, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but smile. As soon as he landed, Chen Zion looked at him. 13th uncle. Chen Daoxuan bowed to Chen Zion and smiled. "Well, are you done?" Chen Zion smiled and nodded. "Young patriarch. Young patriarch." The 9 immortal seedlings of the Chen family saw Chen Daoxuan and saluted him. It seems that the diligent teaching during this period has made Chen Daoxuan establish an extremely majestic image in the hearts of the children. Seeing this scene, Chen Zion nodded slightly. These 9 immortal seedlings will be the pillars of the Chen family in the future. They are so respectful to Chen Daoxuan, which will make it easier for Chen Daoxuan to rule the Chen family in the future. Chen Daoxuan didn't think so much. Seeing the children playing and frolicking, he couldn't help but frown and said seriously, "You are so frolicking. Have you completed today's practice homework?" Hearing this, the faces of the immortal seedlings froze, and Chen Daoxuan walked out of the crowd, bowed his head, and said with a guilty look, "Reply to the young patriarch, it is not yet completed." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan's face became more serious. The way of cultivation is to persist. If you slack off today, you can slack off every day. Haven't I told you that a 1,000-mile dam can be breached by an ant hole? Hearing this scolding, everyone lowered their heads and dared not look at him. Chen Zion saw that Chen Daoxuan was scolding the younger generation of the clan and did not speak to defend him. He knew that this was the time for Chen Daoxuan to establish his prestige among the Chen family's children, and he must not destroy it. Sure enough, after Chen Daoxuan's scolding, everyone bowed their heads and admitted their mistakes and honestly ran to complete today's cultivation homework. Seeing this scene, Chen Zion smiled and said, "Compared to me, you are much stricter in disciplining these little guys." "What I can't do?" Chen Daoxuan smiled and shook his head. "These little guys just like to play. Except for Chen Daochu, Chen Daolian and Chen Daolin, the three little guys are a little calmer. The others are usually like happy rabbits if you don't take care of them." Hearing this, Chen Zion nodded slightly. "That's right. Come to think of it, your cultivation has rarely worried me." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan didn't know how to explain. He couldn't say that he had traveled through time and space and had a mature soul in his body. He had to change the subject and asked, "By the way, Uncle 13, is it because the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword shop is out of stock when you come back this time?" "Yes." Seeing Chen Daoxuan talking about business, Chen Zion said seriously, "As a Hongmeng shop's reputation becomes more and more famous, more and more independent cultivators come to our shop to buy flying swords. In order not to offend these independent cultivators, I have no choice but to shorten the time interval between draws. Look, all 50 flying swords were sold out in less than 2 months." Chen Zion spread his hands with a helpless expression. The Hongmeng flying sword shop had no flying swords to sell, and Chen Zion could not stay in the independent cultivator market at all. Therefore, he had to drive the family's Kanglan cargo ship back to Shuanghu Island to pick up another batch of goods. Seeing him like this, Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, "You came at an unfortunate time. I have traded most of the flying swords produced by the family during this period with the mermaids." Chen Zion was about to ask about this, but unexpectedly Chen Daoxuan took the initiative to speak out. He took 2 steps forward and said excitedly, "How is it? Have you gathered all the spiritual stones for cultivating the spiritual veins this time?" Chen Daoxuan nodded and said, "Thank you for fulfilling your mission." Haha. Haha. Chen Zion couldn't help but laugh wildly. Chen Daoxuan remembered that this kind of wanton laughter was only heard last time when Chen Zion learned that the perverted refining tool such as the wrangling furnace was invented. Even Chen Zion today was happier than that day. If the wrangling furnace was just made, Chen Zion only saw the hope of the family cultivating a spiritual vein. At this moment, hope became reality. The Chen family really needs to have its own spiritual vein. The Chen family has been based on Shuanghu Island for nearly 300 years and finally has the foundation for inheritance. From now on, unless something major happens to the Wangxing Sea, as long as this spiritual vein is in hand, the Chen family will not break off the inheritance. How could Chen Zion, whose long cherished wish had come true, not be excited? Chen Zion now regrets a little. If he had known earlier, he would have asked Chen Daoxuan to come to him earlier. But then he thought again, it was not too late to know now, so he grabbed Chen Daoxuan's hand and said, "Come on, tell me about the transaction with the mermaids." "Okay." Chen Daoxuan smiled and walked into the cave with Chen Zion. Chen Zion Mio was still practicing swordsmanship amid the shouting. In Changping County, the women of Izumo country who had already married were stroking their slightly bulging bellies. The entire Shuanghu Island presented a vibrant scene. Chapter 65, Spiritual Vein Site Selection. In the cave, at the tea table, the two sat opposite each other. Chen Daoxuan personally poured a cup of spiritual tea for Chen Zion and said with a smile, "This is how it happened." Chen Zion took the spiritual tea handed over by Chen Daoxuan and frowned. "Daoxuan, why do you want the mermaids to use the contribution points of my Chen family? If I remember correctly, my Chen family doesn't have any contribution points at all." Obviously, Chen Zion didn't understand what financial sovereignty was. Chen Daoxuan couldn't explain it to him clearly for a while, so he had to explain simply, First, it is to make it more convenient for our two tribes to trade, and second, it is also to allow the mermaids and my Chen family to have exclusive transactions. Exclusive transaction? Chen Zion grasped the key point in Chen Daoxuan's words. He quickly figured out what this exclusive transaction meant. In the process of continuous transactions between the two tribes, once the mermaids have a large number of contribution points of the Chen family, in addition to choosing to trade with the Chen family, can they use the contribution points of the Chen family to trade with other families? After understanding this, Chen Zion looked at Chen Daoxuan with admiration. Seeing Chen Zion looking at him like this, Chen Daoxuan felt a little uncomfortable. He quickly changed the subject and said, by the way, Uncle 13, where do you think our Chen family's spiritual vein is more suitable? Hearing about the spiritual vein, Chen Zion really didn't care about the mermaids using the Chen family's contribution points. His eyes lit up at first, and then he said solemnly, I think it's more appropriate to be in the Red Copper Mountains. Why do you think so? Chen Daoxuan asked. The Red Copper Mountains is where my Chen family's ancestors practiced, and there is a strong atmosphere of practice, and most of our caves are also built in the Red Copper Mountains, Chen Zion said, and found that he couldn't say too many benefits. It seems that the Red Copper Mountains have no advantages except for the relics of the Chen ancestors. As for the caves, it doesn't matter, as long as the Chen family members are mobilized to build as many as they want. After thinking for a long time, seeing Chen Daoxuan looking at him calmly, Chen Zion was a little angry and said, okay, don't keep me in suspense. Where do you think it is suitable to build a spiritual vein? From your appearance, you should have already made up your mind. Chen Daoxuan put down the spiritual tea in his hand and nodded. I do have some ideas. Chen Zion raised his head, then tell me. Chen Daoxuan pondered for a moment and said, Uncle 13, where do you think the most important place for my Chen family is now? Of course it's the Flying Sword Factory. Chen Zion said without thinking. Although the Hongmeng Flying Sword Factory only has 5 production rooms and only 15 workers in total, even with Chen Daoxuan, there are only 16 people. But it is these 16 people who have fulfilled the long cherished wish of the Chen ancestors for hundreds of years and earned a spiritual vein for the Chen family. Indeed, the most important reason for the Chen family to earn this spiritual vein is that they have obtained huge profits that are unimaginable to the outside world in the trade with the mermaids. But even without the mermaids, with the terrifying production capacity of the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Factory, the Chen family will be able to earn enough spiritual stones to cultivate the spirit veins in a few years at most. Chen Zian, who has a booming flying sword business in the Guanghan Prefecture Sanxiu market, firmly believes this. Since the Flying Sword Factory is the core of my Chen family, and the spirit vein is also an indispensable place for my Chen family cultivators to practice, why can't the two be combined into one? Chen Daoxuan asked back. You mean? Chen Zion's eyes lit up. Yes, I suggest that the spirit vein be placed in the Shuanghu Island Industrial Zone. Although Chen Zion didn't know what the strange name of the industrial zone given by Chen Daoxuan meant, he didn't object. Just like he named the refining workshop the Rainbow Sound Flying Sword Factory. Chen Daoxuan has many practices that Chen Zion can't understand, but they have played a good role in the development of the family. Over time, Chen Zion kept silent about things he didn't understand. This time is the same. Although Chen Zion really wanted to place the spiritual vein in the Red Copper Mountains, Chen Daoxuan's words were obviously more reasonable. In addition to some relics of Chen's ancestors, there seemed to be nothing worth reminiscing about in the Red Copper Mountains. The Red Copper mine was exhausted, and now there is a more advanced flying sword factory, and even the underground fire room has been sealed for a long time. Counting it all, in addition to Chen Daoxuan's spiritual eye that is about to dry up, there seems to be nothing valuable in the Red Copper Mountains. What is there to be nostalgic about such a worthless barren mountain? Alas. Chen Zion thought and sighed deeply. What's wrong, Uncle 13? Do you think there is something wrong? No, there is nothing wrong. Your choice is right. Very good. Chen Zion looked lonely, but forced a smile. Chen Daoxuan naturally couldn't understand Chen Zion's mentality. He was now completely immersed in the vision of the future development of the Chen family. Cultivate spiritual veins. Select a large number of immortal seedlings. train apprentices for refining, expand the scale of flying sword factories, and step by step, occupy the casual cultivation flying sword market in Guanghan Prefecture and even other prefectures. It can be said that according to Chen Daoxuan's plan, the Chen family of Shuanghu Island will inevitably rise. It may face suppression from some family forces in the process of rising, but with the control of Carnian sword sect over Wangxinghe, Chen Daoxuan believes that he can survive these suppressions. After all, the Wangxinghe today is not the extremely chaotic Wangxinghe 1,000 years ago. There are no rules and everything depends on fists. In the current Wangxinghe, as long as you do not violate the decree of Carnian sword sect, you basically don't have to worry about any immortal cultivation family daring to come to the door and destroy the door of the small family. This is also the reason why small families like the Chen family are obviously not strong, but they have not been destroyed by the big families to rob the cultivation resources. On the one hand, small families like the Chen family have few resources and are looked down upon by the big families. Another important reason is that the deterrence of Carnian sword sect makes the immortal cultivation families in Wangxinghe dare not cross the line. When Carnian sword sect had just unified Wangxinghe, a Yuanying family did not believe in this evil. They relied on their strength to wipe out the entire family of a foundation building family, and even spared the ordinary members of the other party. For this reason, Carnian sword sect was furious, and the former sect leader personally killed the Yuanying Zhenjin, the guardian of the Yuanying family, and killed all the cultivators of the family. As for the ordinary members of this Yuanying family, they were sold as slaves to various states in Wangxinghe. A Yuanying family with a great reputation was wiped out like this, which was extremely miserable. So far, no immortal cultivation family dared to ignore the decree issued by Carnian sword sect. At least before the decline of Carnian sword sect, no family dared to cross the line. Not to mention that Carnian sword sect is now in its heyday, suppressing the entire Zuanqingdao League in Chuan country. The immortal cultivation families in Wangxinghe dared not act rashly. Perhaps they dare to take the risk of doing some small actions in secret, but no major immortal cultivation clan in Wangxinghe dares to do such a thing as annihilating an entire clan at a person's home. Chapter 66 Tong Mei Pill. Seeing Chen Daoxuan's excited look, Chen Ziyan's loneliness quickly disappeared. He smiled mysteriously and said, "Daoxuan, guess what I brought back this time?" "What?" Chen Daoxuan asked curiously. Hearing this, Chen Ziyan didn't say anything. He patted the storage bag with his hand, and a jade bottle with a green body appeared on the tea table. "This is." Chen Daoxuan took the jade bottle on the table, opened the seal of the jade bottle, and a strange fragrance came to his nose. Tong Mei Pill. Looking at the round light yellow pill in the jade bottle, Chen Daoxuan said in surprise. Chen Ziyan nodded and smiled. "It is Tong Mei Pill." This time, it happened that Zhao's Baodan Pavilion had just refined a batch of elixirs, and this Tong Mei Pill is one of them. Although Tong Mei Pill is only a first level elixir, because it is an elixir that allows immortal seedlings to cross the mortal realm, this elixir is the most expensive among all first level elixirs. In Guanghan Prefecture, the market price of a Tong Mei Pill is generally 500 spirit stones, and it depends on whether the elixir shop has it in stock. In Guanghan Prefecture, the Zhao family is the largest elixir dealer. In Zhao's Treasure Pill Pavilion, there are all kinds of first level elixirs. For example, elixirs that assist in cultivation and elixirs that detoxify and restore ki are continuously supplied to the outside by Zhao's Treasure Pill Pavilion for a long time. As long as the cultivator has spirit stones, they can buy them. But there is only one kind of elixir that you may not be able to buy, even if you have money. That is the realm-breaking elixir. There are generally two types of realm-breaking elixirs. One is an elixir that assists in breaking through a small realm, such as an elixir that breaks through from the initial stage of ki refining to the middle stage of ki refining. This kind of elixir is generally more expensive than the elixir that assists in cultivation, but the price is limited, and it will not exceed twice the price at most. The price of the other kind of realm-breaking elixir for a large realm is terrifying. For example, the Tongmei elixir that directly crosses from the mortal realm to the key refining stage, and even the foundation building elixir that breaks through from the great perfection of key refining to the foundation building stage, all belong to this kind of realm breaking elixir. The price of this kind of elixir is generally more than 10 times that of the same level auxiliary cultivation elixir, and it is often out of stock. Tongmei Dan is a bit better. After all, the medicinal materials and difficulty of refining it are not too high, and the supply is relatively sufficient. Generally speaking, as long as you have the patience to wait in Zhao's Baodan Pavilion, you can always buy it after waiting for a while. But the second level spiritual elixir, the foundation building elixir, is different. As long as this kind of spiritual elixir appears in the elixir shop, it will definitely be fought over by the cultivators. Therefore, usually the foundation building elixir will not appear in the elixir shop, but will be auctioned at the auction house. Basically, the minimum auction price of a foundation building elixir will fluctuate between 30,000 and 40,000 spiritual stones. If there is a cultivator stuck at the time node of breaking through the foundation building stage, there are not a few who will spend all their money to buy the foundation building elixir. At that time, it is difficult to say how high the price will soar. In the history of Zhao's auction house, it is not uncommon for the foundation building elixir to be sold at a sky-high price of 100,000 spiritual stones. Of course, this level of sky-high price is generally rare. Usually, a cultivator prepares 50,000 spiritual stones, which is enough to buy a foundation building elixir. After all, a foundation building cultivator is still not as good as a spiritual vein that can be passed down from generation to generation in the family. Not to mention that there is also the risk of failure in foundation building after using the foundation building pill. For the big forces, the value of the foundation building pill is not as good as the strategic resource of the spirit vein. Otherwise, the Zhao family would not prefer to auction the foundation building pill, but never sell the spirit vein to the outside world. Playing with the jade bottle in his hand, Chen Daoxuan was full of joy. He and his 13th uncle Chen Daoxuan really had a tacit understanding. He had just prepared the spirit stone for cultivating the spirit vein, and Chen Daoxuan sent the Tongmei pill. In this way, the 9 immortal seedlings of the Chen family will soon cross the mortal realm and officially enter the key refining period. The Chen family's immortal seedlings entering the key refining period not only adds 9 new key refining cultivators to the Chen family, but also has a greater significance in that Chen Daoxuan can teach them to refine weapons. Once the Chen family's immortal seedlings master even the lowest level of the Qiang flying sword refining method, the flying sword factory will usher in a new round of expansion. At that time, the production capacity of the Hongmeng flying sword factory will inevitably soar. Whether it is the loose cultivator market in Guanghan Prefecture or the mermaid market, the Chen family can satisfy it. Unlike now, the Chen family only cares about the market of the mermaids, but is unable to occupy the broader market of independent cultivators in Guanghan Prefecture. It's a pity that there are only 5 Tongmei pills here, which are only enough for 5 people to break through to the key refining stage. Chen Daoxuan was a little bit insignificant. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan said unhappily, Chen Daoxuan is only 5 years old, and there are a few boys who are only 6 or 7 years old. Do you expect such young children to break through the key refining stage and learn to refine weapons from you, and then work in the Fijian factory? Chen Daoxuan was choked for a moment. They only care about expanding the scale and production capacity of the Fijian factory, but they have ignored the age of the Chen family's immortal seedlings. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan bowed and said, Daoxuan is too impatient. You. Chen Daoxuan shook his head. You are always so anxious. You know, since you took over the Chen family of Shuanghu Island, the family has developed fast enough. When I came back this time, I saw the lively and extraordinary appearance of Changping County. I couldn't believe that this was the Chen family. Daoxuan, we cultivators have a long lifespan. At least you still have a long way to go in the future. You don't have to fight for the day. Daoxuan has learned from you. Chen Daoxuan bowed respectfully. Indeed, as Chen Daoxuan said, the crazy money making during this period has made Chen Daoxuan lose his original intention. He only wants the Chen family to continue to grow. The faster the better. But some things are not the faster the better. For example, there are only more than 1,000 children in the Chen family, and there are only 9 immortal seedlings in the Chen family. Together with him and his 13th uncle, there are only 11 cultivators. And the children of the women from Izumo country who were brought back have not yet been born. The Chen family is now like a butterfly waiting to break out of its cocoon. Only after surviving this period of darkness before dawn can it usher in a real outbreak. Otherwise, even if Chen Daoxuan forced the Chen family to collect more wealth, would they have enough cultivators to protect it? Obviously not. Although Chen Daoxuan asked himself that his strength was not weak among the cultivators in the key refining stage, he was not the opponent of the cultivators in the foundation establishment stage. Not to mention the foundation establishment cultivators, even those top level cultivators in the 9th level of key refining, as long as they could withstand his 3x outbreak, Chen Daoxuan was basically not the opponent of the other party. So, the current Chen family is still very weak. Although this is the Wangxing Sea, with the decree of the Cunning sword sect, it is not the peaceful environment of the previous life after all. If the Chen family's hard power is insufficient, it will still face great risks. For example, if the Immortal Cultivation clan really wants to destroy the Chen family, it can completely rely on the hands of monsters. If the Cunning sword sect does not have enough evidence at that time, the matter will only be left unresolved. After thinking through this layer, Chen Daoxuan's eyes gradually became clear. He saluted and said, "Uncle 13, don't worry, I will never let the cultivators in the family fall behind in cultivation. It's good that you know this." Chen Zion nodded with satisfaction. He was afraid that Chen Daoxuan would be blinded by the spirit stones and forget what the foundation of a family is. For a family of immortal cultivators, whether it is spirit stones, spirit veins or other cultivation resources, they are essentially for the purpose of improving the cultivation and strength of the cultivators in the family. If you only care about earning spirit stones and don't care about the cultivation strength of the family cultivators, then for the Chen family, it is a wrong path, and it is absolutely unacceptable. Chapter 67 The Power of Creation. The next day, Chuanghu Island Industrial Zone. Chen Zion and Chen Daoxuan stood in the air, overlooking the Hongmeng Fijian factory on the vast plain. At this moment, in their eyes, the Hongmeng Fijian factory was like a matchbox sitting on the plain surrounded by wilderness, very abrupt. Around the Fijian factory, except for an official road connecting Changping County and Chuanghu Island port, there were only a few dormitory buildings under construction. What is that? Chen Zion pointed to the 5-story buildings rising from the ground next to the Fijian factory and asked. Looking in the direction of Chen Zion's finger, Chen Daoxuan smiled and said, "That is the workers' dormitory area that I ordered Chen Gankeo to build." At this point, Chen Daoxuan sighed. There are still too few craftsmen in the clan. There are too many buildings that need to be built in the clan now, and there is a serious shortage of craftsmen. After hearing this, Chen Zion added, "Yes, it's not just the craftsmen. The population of our Chen family has been decreasing since the immortal generation of monks was almost wiped out. In recent years, it has dropped to less than 4,000 people." Talking about the history of the family's decline, Chen Zion couldn't help but feel sad. But soon he saw the county town of Changping County looming at the end of his sight, and Chen Zion's expression recovered, and he said with relief, "But fortunately, all this is over. My Chen family will soon have its own spiritual veins, and will never be like the past, like rootless duckweed." Yeah. Chen Daoxuan nodded heavily, and the uncle and nephew smiled at each other. "Is it here?" Arriving at the industrial zone, Chen Zion looked around the surrounding environment and asked. "Yes." Chen Daoxuan nodded. According to the ancient books, the first level spiritual vein can cover a maximum of 10 miles of land. This place is only a dozen miles away from the flying sword factory. Once you are out of the coverage of the spiritual vein, you can reach the flying sword factory. It is very convenient. In that case, let's get started. Chen Zion nodded. Upon hearing this, Chen Daoxuan patted one of the many storage bags on his waist. The next second, the materials for setting up the soul formation flew out of the storage bag. Seeing this, Chen Zion stepped back and watched Chen Daoxuan set up the formation. As a weapon refiner, Chen Daoxuan's attainments in formations are very high. Among the 100 arts of cultivating immortals, the attainments of weapon refiners in formations are second only to those of formation masters. Because weapon refiners and formation masters are two major professions that specialize in formations. In the process of refining magic tools, the last step for weapon refiners is to fuse the formation. The so-called fusion formation is to fuse the formation with the refining materials into one. You can imagine how good the attainments of weapon refiners in formations are. If the attainment of formation is not enough, the weapon refiner can't even outline the formation pattern, let alone melt the formation. And the traditional formation master is even more so. They can not only arrange the formation, but also create the formation. The formation master of the same level is even better than the weapon refiner. Chen Daoxuan has already comprehended the first level soul formation. As long as the spirit stone is in place, he can arrange the formation immediately. He was seen placing the materials for arranging the formation one by one on the wilderness plain. 2 hours later, all the formation materials were arranged by Chen Daoxuan, and a mysterious formation pattern was outlined. Okay, the next step is to place the spirit stone on the formation node. After arranging the soul formation, Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing this scene, Chen Zion stepped forward and said, "Do you want my help?" Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but look at his 13th uncle suspiciously. As if irritated by Chen Daoxuan's eyes, Chen Zion blew his beard and glared. "What kind of eyes are you looking at? Your uncle also learned the family's weapon refining inheritance. Although I didn't get started, I still have some attainments in formations. Otherwise, how do you think my Chen family's earth fire room came from?" Hearing Uncle 13 mention the family's earth fire room, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help laughing. If he hadn't said it, he would have forgotten about it. Since Uncle 13 can arrange the formation of the earth fire room, theoretically he can arrange the soul formation without much problem. After all, this is only a first level formation. Not to mention that he is just helping him place spirit stones at the formation nodes. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan hurriedly bowed his hands and apologized. "Uncle 13, don't blame me. It's my nephew who is too concerned." Chen Zion was not really angry with Chen Daoxuan, but he felt a little uncomfortable when he saw that the family's spiritual vein was built, and he didn't help at all, and just watched from the side. Chen Daoxuan didn't think so much. He patted another storage bag. The next moment, spirit stones flew out of the storage bag. After careful counting, there were more than 100,000 of them. These spirit stones were the entire savings of the Chen family. Although in theory 100,000 spirit stones could cultivate a spirit vein, in order to ensure that there was no risk, Chen Daoxuan took out the only 2,000 spirit stones left in the clan treasury. In other words, the number of spirit stones piled in front of the two of them was more than 100,000. So many spirit stones were piled on the ground, forming a small mountain, which was very eye-catching. This was only in Xuanhu Island, an island with no people for thousands of miles. If it was placed in Guanghan Prefecture, even with the Zhao family's decree, there might be jealous casual cultivators who would take the risk. This was the first time Chen Zion saw so many spirit stones piled in front of him, and he was a little out of control for a while. Although he saw more than 60,000 spirit stones in the storage bag that Chen Daoxuan handed to him last time. But those more than 60,000 spirit stones were in the storage bag after all, and they were not as shocking as the ones piled in front of him. Thinking of this, Chen Zion took a deep breath. The true key wrapped up some of the spirit stones and put them in the storage bag, and then flew towards the node of the formation. Chen Daoxuan put away the other spirit stones and flew in the opposite direction. With the joint efforts of the two, they finally placed all the spirit stones until the sunset. Returned to their respective locations. Chen Zion glanced at Chen Daoxuan and said, "Have you arranged everything? Well, what about Uncle 13? It's all arranged too." Hearing this, both of them breathed a sigh of relief and then laughed. The two laughed for a while. Chen Zion handed over the remaining spirit stones in the storage bag and said, "You can take these spirit stones back to the clan treasury." Looking at the storage bag handed over by Chen Zion, Chen Daoxuan shook his head and said, "Uncle 13, you have spent all the spirit stones you earned from selling the flying sword. to buy Tang Meidan this time. You can take the remaining more than 2,000 spirit stones back to Guang'an Prefecture to purchase supplies. Chen Ziyan knew what supplies Chen Daoxuan was referring to, and did not refuse, nodded and said, okay. After talking about business, Chen Daoxuan took out a spirit stone from his storage bag, and looked at the white mist in the spirit stone, which was the size of a baby's fist, and murmured, is this the power of creation? Chen Ziyan looked at the spirit stone in Chen Daoxuan's hand and nodded, yes, it is with this little power of creation in the spirit stone, that the spirit vein can be cultivated. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan exclaimed, it's amazing, it's worthy of the name of creation. Chen Ziyan smiled and said nothing. As the universal currency for cultivators to trade, the value of spirit stones is naturally not as simple as the spiritual energy they contain. Otherwise, since the spirit vein can continuously produce spiritual energy, what is the use of spirit stones? Not to mention that the spiritual energy content in the spirit stone is not much, it is not enough for cultivators to refine and practice. In fact, the spiritual energy contained in the spirit stone is more like a protective layer for the most core trace of the power of creation. If a prodigal son absorbs and refines the spiritual energy in the spirit stone, without the protection of the spiritual energy, this trace of the power of creation will quickly dissipate between heaven and earth, which is very magical. Chapter 68 Lington. Half a month later. The 10,000 spirit stones placed on the main node of the soul condensation array lost all their spiritual energy, and the trace of the power of creation in the spirit stones also penetrated into the earth veins along the array lines. The spirit stones that lost all their spiritual energy were like weathered stones. With a light pinch, they turned into a pile of powder and disappeared with the wind. After rubbing the spirit stone powder in his hand, Chen Ziyan stood up excitedly and looked at Chen Daoxuan and said, the power of creation penetrated the earth veins, and the spirit veins were established. The spirit veins were established. Ha 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 ha. At this moment, Chen Ziyan was as excited as a child, dancing with joy. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan also breathed a sigh of relief. He could clearly feel that the spiritual energy emanating from this main array node was becoming more and more dense. According to this trend, this place would sooner or later become a rare spiritual land. The first level soul condensation array has a total of 1 main array node and 127 secondary array nodes. These array nodes can all be transformed into spiritual eyes, providing a steady stream of spiritual energy for my Chen family cultivators. At this point, Chen Ziyan's eyes lit up. Now, in less than half a month, the main node of the formation has already released spiritual energy, proving that the spiritual vein has been initially formed. When all 127 secondary nodes of the formation are transformed into spiritual eyes, the spiritual vein of the Chen family will be completely cultivated. By then, the first level spiritual vein of the Chen family will be enough for at least more than 100 key refining cultivators to practice at the same time without worrying about the problem of spiritual energy exhaustion. Compared with the wild spiritual eyes without source, the spiritual eyes on the spiritual vein can continuously absorb spiritual energy from the spiritual vein, and there is no need to worry about the problem of spiritual energy exhaustion. Unless a high-level cultivator violently extracts the spiritual energy from the spiritual vein in a short period of time, it is possible to cause the spiritual vein to be damaged. Of course, generally, no cultivator will do such a self-defeating behavior that incurs public anger. Because spiritual energy is indispensable to both low-level cultivators and high-level cultivators, no one will deliberately damage the spiritual vein. Even if this spiritual vein belongs to a hostile force, everyone will not destroy it. At most, all the resources on the spiritual vein will be plundered. As for the spiritual vein itself, after the Cunning Sword sect conquered the spiritual vein of Chuan Kingdom, they would generally choose to set up a mountain protection formation or build a fairy city to occupy the spiritual vein. Even if there is no chance to occupy it, the Cunning Sword sect will only plunder resources and withdraw without destroying the spiritual vein. Otherwise, if everyone does not follow the rules, the immortal cultivation world is constantly in dispute, and the spiritual vein has long been destroyed. How can there be today's prosperous cultivation? Looking at the surrounding environment, Chen Ziyan nodded and said, this main formation node will be enough to turn into a spiritual pond in the future. Spiritual pond? Chen Daoxuan was a little confused. He had only heard of the spiritual eye, and this was the first time he heard of the spiritual pond. Chen Daoxuan smiled and explained, when the spiritual energy is dense enough, it will turn into liquid. When the spiritual liquid accumulates, it can turn into a spiritual pond. Of course, the more spiritual liquid there is, the bigger the spiritual pond will be. At that time, you can call it a spiritual lake or a spiritual sea, whatever you like. But for a first level spiritual vein, the spiritual liquid turning into a pond is basically the limit. Spiritual energy turns into liquid. So that's it. Chen Daoxuan nodded in understanding. He has been practicing until now, but he didn't know that spiritual energy could be so dense that it turned into spiritual liquid. He didn't know what the scene would be like at that time. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but get a little excited. After a moment of silence, Chen Daoxuan continued, since the main spiritual eye has been formed, the construction of your cave residence should also be put on the agenda. No, it should not be called a cave residence now. Chen Daoxuan glanced at the endless plain and smiled. It should be called a fairy palace. Hearing the slightly teasing word fairy palace, Chen Daoxuan's face was quite embarrassed, and he quickly begged for mercy. Uncle 13, please don't embarrass me. Ha ha ha. Seeing Chen Daoxuan's embarrassed look, Chen Daoxuan stroked his beard and laughed. Seeing Uncle 13's relaxed and happy look, Chen Daoxuan also felt very happy. Over the years, Uncle 13 has lived too hard and too tired. One person supports a family, and outsiders can't understand Chen Daoxuan's hardships at all. Moreover, Chen Daoxuan has no natural talent, but is just an ordinary cultivator with poor qualifications, which is even more tormenting. In the following days, Chen Daoxuan did not rush to Guang'an Prefecture to sell flying swords, but stayed in Xuanhu Island to help Chen Daoxuan and many immortal seedlings build a spiritual residence. As the future patriarch of the Chen family, Chen Daoxuan's spiritual palace must not only be built on the main spiritual eye, but also have high enough specifications. Otherwise, the spiritual palaces of other Chen family cultivators will not be easy to build. It is impossible for ordinary Chen family cultivators to build spiritual palaces more luxurious and magnificent than the spiritual palace of the patriarch, right? Such behavior beyond the rules will inevitably damage the dignity of the patriarch and is absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, building a spiritual palace for Chen Daoxuan is not only Chen Daoxuan's private matter, but also related to the face of the Chen family of Xuanhu Island and the dignity of the patriarch. It is not a trivial matter. Although Chen Daoxuan said that the Immortal Palace was a bit exaggerated, when the power of the Chen family continued to grow in the future, I'm afraid that the spiritual palace would really have to be built into an Immortal Palace. Although the Chen family lacked craftsmen, with the addition of Chen Daoxuan, the new force, the speed of building the spiritual palace was like an accelerator, and it increased rapidly. In just less than a month, Chen Daoxuan's spiritual palace was completed. In this month, in addition to the completion of Chen Daoxuan's spiritual palace, there were two happy events. The first is that the spiritual vein is completely formed. In addition to the main spiritual eye on the spiritual vein, the 127 secondary spiritual eyes are all emitting spiritual energy. Seeing the spiritual energy constantly dissipating, Chen Daoxuan was distressed and quickly found Chen Daoxuan, asking him to stop the production of flying swords in his hands and arrange the spiritual gathering formation for the family spiritual vein. In this regard, Chen Daoxuan naturally had no reason to refuse. The spiritual gathering formation is the most common formation in the cultivation world. It is simple and easy to learn and widely used. In fact, with Chen Daoxuan's attainments in formation, if he was not afraid of problems, he could try to arrange it himself. In addition to the complete formation of the spiritual vein, the second happy event of the Chen family is the addition of 5 new key refining cultivators of the first key refining stage. At this point, the number of cultivators in the Chen family finally broke the pattern of 2 people and reached 7. The remaining 4 immortal seedlings are too young, and Chen Daoxuan did not have enough spiritual stones last time, so he was unable to buy Tang Meidan for them, so they have not yet been able to break through to the key refining stage. The oldest of the 5 newly added key refining cultivators is only 10 years old, and his name is Chen Daolin. The youngest is only 7 years old, and his name is Chen Daozi. Chen Daolin, Chen Daochu, Chen Daolian, Chen Daochun, and Chen Daoxuan, a total of 4 men and 1 woman, are key refining cultivators. Not long after the immortal seedlings broke through the key refining stage, Chen Daoxuan, who was really busy, did not forget them, and directly pulled them to the construction site to work as laborers. It was a pity that they were used as child laborers just after they broke through to the key refining stage. However, everyone also knew that the spiritual mansion that the family was building was built for them, so they not only did not feel repulsive, but were full of motivation. Even Chen Daoxuan proposed all kinds of unrestrained ideas. What about engraving a floating formation on the spiritual mansion to make the spiritual mansion float in the air? And what about building an aerial spiritual spring and an aerial garden? It really made Chen Daoxuan very angry. He found that compared with the new generation of Chen family cultivators, Chen Daoxuan's ideas were already very stable. Si estás escuchando esta novela en canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas. Significa que descargaran y subirán sin esfuerzo te invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas y encontrarás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos géneros. Te esperamos para sumergirte en mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 69. Training Apprentices. Chuanghu Island Port. The Kanglan was anchored among the slave ships of the Chen family, which were about 150 feet long, and looked quite small. In front of the dock, Chen Daoxuan waved his hand and said, "No need to send me off, you all can go back." Looking around, Chen Daoxuan finally set his eyes on Chen Daoxuan, and a flash of reluctance flashed in his eyes. "You can leave for now." "Yes, young clan leader." Chen Daoxuan reported to the clan members and stepped forward and said, "Uncle 13 should maintain the original number of flying swords sold when we go to Guanghan Prefecture this time." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan nodded and said, "It should be so. Now that my Chen family's spiritual veins have been established and the foundation has been established, we only need to wait for Daoxuan and others to grow up, and then they can take on the responsibility of the family. It won't be too late to sell flying swords in large quantities at that time." Seeing Chen Daoxuan mention this matter on his own initiative, Chen Daoxuan felt more at ease with him. This proved that Chen Daoxuan was not dazzled by the huge profits brought by the flying sword business. He knew that at this time, the most important thing for the Chen family was not to earn a lot of spirit stones, but the lack of time for growth. Although the second-hand magic weapon market in Guanghan Prefecture's Sanxiu market is mostly occupied by Sanxiu, it is hard to say that there are no great families involved in the market. Even if the great families do not care about this little profit, the children of the great families who supply the second-hand flying swords to the magic weapon shops always get a share of the profit. The Chen family's wanton sale of brand new flying swords will not only have an impact on the business of these second-hand magic weapon shops, but also affect the children of the great families who supply these magic weapon shops. At this time, it is really inconvenient for the Chen family to make these enemies. Before, the Chen family had no spiritual vein, so they had to be radical. Otherwise, without spiritual energy cultivation, their cultivation would not improve, so they would not care about offending people. But now that the Chen family has a spiritual vein, if they want to monopolize the magic weapon market in Guanghan Prefecture's Sanxiu market, they will inevitably be hated by the original magic weapon shop owners and some children of the great families. How unwise it is to be hated by some enemies early, in order to earn money that is not needed temporarily. Chen Daoxuan has been in charge of the Chen family for so many years. Although the family is weak, it still has a foothold on Chuanghu Island. It relies on the word prudent. Seeing that Uncle 13 quickly understood his intention, Chen Daoxuan nodded with relief. In his imagination, before the Chen family's strength grew, he was not going to occupy the magic weapon market in the Sanxiu market. Most of the magic weapons in the Sanxiu market are low-level magic weapons. Sanxiu can only afford to buy a first-level medium-grade magic weapon for 100 spirit stones at most. There are very few first-level high-grade magic weapons in the magic weapon shops in the Sanxiu market. This is not because the shopkeepers of the magic weapon shops cannot get first-level high-grade magic weapons, but that the pockets of the Sanxiu are empty and their purchasing power is limited. In addition, it is difficult to refine magic weapons, and the profit of low-level magic weapons is meager. The big families of Immortal Cultivation generally look down on the magic weapon market and the Sangxiu market. For example, when the Yang family wants to purchase magic weapons, they directly go to Zhao's treasure pavilion to place large orders. The magic weapon transactions between their big families are often on the scale of thousands or even tens of thousands of magic weapons. With the number of weapon refiners in the Zhao family, they are already exhausted. In order to meet the shortage of magic weapons for hundreds of thousands of cultivators and their family, as well as the shortage of magic weapons for the children of other great families, how can they still have the energy to care about the scattered cultivators and the scattered cultivator market? According to rumors, the Zhao family faces a huge shortage of magic weapons every year. In other words, many of the magic weapons in the Zhao family's treasure pavilion are imported from other prefectures or even other states through special channels. The magic weapons they refine themselves cannot even meet the needs of hundreds of thousands of cultivators and their family. In fact, with the war between Cunning Sword Sect and Chuan Kingdom for more than 400 years, both sides are in great shortage of resources such as magic weapons and elixirs. But when the war reaches this point, neither side dares to retreat a step, because once they retreat, they may be doomed. Whether it is Cunning Sword Sect or Zuan King Dao League, they are gritting their teeth and holding on. Fortunately, Cunning Sword Sect has the upper hand in this war, and the war is also raging in Chuan Kingdom, which does not affect the Wangxinghe base camp. Therefore, the Chen family, who were far away in Guanghan Prefecture, Kangzhou, could hardly feel the impact of the war. But for the monks of Chuan country, the impact of this war that lasted for 400 years was too great. Farewell to Chen Xian. Chen Daoxuan began to formally teach the 5 newly promoted key refining monks of the Chen family to refine weapons. In Chen Daoxuan's opinion, the resources that Chen Daoxuan and the other 5 had to learn to refine weapons were hundreds of times better than when he first came. Nothing to say. There are 3 major steps in refining weapons: refining, shaping, and melting array. The first and most tedious, refining, because of the existence of the melting spirit furnace. This step is directly emitted. Eliminating the step of refining materials is not as simple as not having to learn fire control. There is also a huge amount of energy wasted in the process of refining materials every time. Chen Daoxuan remembered that when he was learning to refine weapons, every time he refined the materials, even if he had the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra to help restore his consciousness, the consumption of true energy was real. He needed to refine the spiritual energy bit by bit to recover. It takes about 2 or 3 days to refine the materials, and at least 1 night to restore the true key. Added up, even with the help of the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra, Chen Daoxuan can only try to shape and fuse the array once every 3 days. This is not considering the failure of refining materials. Not to mention that Chen Daoxuan was completely self-taught at that time, and no one taught him the knowledge of array formation and fusion array. It can be seen that Chen Daoxuan's talent in refining is really a monster. Even in the huge Guanghan prefecture, no one has ever heard of someone with his talent in refining. And now, how good are the resources for Chen Daoxuan and others to learn refining? Not only do they not have to refine materials, but they can also try to shape and fuse the array up to 5 times a day. If the workers in the Flying Sword Factory work in 3 shifts, they can even have up to 12 opportunities to refine flying swords every day. Moreover, the shaping and fusion of the first level inferior flying sword does not consume much spiritual consciousness and true ki. Even if you have the cultivation level of ki refining, you can easily do it. Not only that, the crowd also had Chen Daoxuan, a senior first-class top-grade weapon refiner, who was always by their side to teach them. He almost shouted in their ears with a loudspeaker, "Chen Daoxuan, are you a pig?" No matter how good-tempered Chen Daoxuan was, he was mad at Chen Daoxuan and his friends for so many days. How many times have I told you that the way to fuse the array lies in the foundation? You can't even engrave the first array pattern steadily. How can you engrave the rest? Not to mention the final fusion of the array into the embryo. Hearing this scolding, Chen Daoxuan's small shoulders trembled slightly, and his face was drawn. After more than a month of teaching, even with Chen Daoxuan's good temper, he was almost maddened by Chen Daoxuan and his idiots. Chen Daoxuan now finally understood how those parents who often help their children with homework in various videos in his previous life felt. It's really true that if you don't learn the father's kindness and the son's filial piety, you will be in chaos. Chapter 70 Wind Attribute Flying Sword. Hongmeng Flying Sword Factory. In a production workshop, Chen Daoxuan sat cross-legged in front of the huge silver-white wrangling furnace, preparing to refine the second magic weapon for himself. Generally speaking, the number of magic weapons that a cultivator in the key refining stage controls will increase as his spiritual consciousness increases. With the strength of the spiritual consciousness of a cultivator in the early stage of key refining, he can only control one magic weapon at most. If he controls more, it will be difficult to control, and it will be difficult to exert the maximum power of the magic weapon. In the middle stage of key refining, the spiritual consciousness increases sharply, and the cultivator can use one more magic weapon. Of course, for a casual cultivator in the key refining stage, it is good to have one magic weapon to use. Who has the extra money to buy more magic weapons? This difficulty naturally does not exist for Chen Daoxuan. As a weapon refiner, Chen Daoxuan can refine as many magic weapons as he wants, not to mention that his Chen family also has a magic weapon such as wrangling furnace to assist in refining. The reason why he did not refine it was because he had been busy with the family's spiritual veins before. As for the matter of refining the second magic weapon, it was naturally put behind. Taking a deep breath, Chen Daoxuan was about to take out the Fengyun mine ore from the storage bag, but he heard a movement from the production room next door. Bang! A dull explosion came from next door. Following the explosion, Chen Daoxuan exclaimed, "Brother Daochu, you superimposed the formation wrong again. You said I was stupid in sword practice. It seems that you are not much better." "Shut up, you can do it if you can." Hearing the conversation between the two, Chen Daoxuan's mouth twitched, and then he stood up expressionlessly, walked to the door of the production room, and laid a soundproof formation. In an instant, the whole world was quiet. He exhaled a breath of turbid air, and threw the troubles he just heard out of his mind. Chen Daoxuan's eyes were slightly condensed. The magic weapon he was going to refine today was not a first level low grade magic weapon, nor a first level middle grade magic weapon, but a first level high grade flying sword. Logically speaking, Chen Daoxuan already had a first level high grade flying sword, the Fixu sword. It's just that the Fixu sword is a water attributed flying sword. When using the covering rain sword art, it is appropriate to use the Fixu sword, but using the chasing wind sword art will conflict with the attributes of the Fixu sword itself. Therefore, Chen Daoxuan wants to refine a wind attributed flying sword to cooperate with the power of the chasing wind sword art. Among all the first level magic tools, the first level top grade magic tools are slightly different from the first level low grade and medium grade magic tools. Generally speaking, the first level low grade magic tools only need 50 spirit stones to buy, and the price of the first level medium grade magic tools is only twice as expensive, about 100 spirit stones. But the price of the first level top grade magic tools will skyrocket, reaching at least 500 spirit stones. The reason for this is that the first level top grade magic tools have already involved a slight change in attributes. For example, the Fixu sword in Chen Daoxuan's hand is a water attributed flying sword. If a cultivator who practices water attributed skills controls it, it can increase its power by 30% out of thin air. Of course, most of the techniques practiced by key refining monks are used to lay the foundation, and there are very few key refining techniques that involve attribute changes. It is not a good thing for monks to practice attribute techniques too early. For example, if a monk practices fire attribute techniques during the foundation building process, the violent fire attribute true ki will transform into true essence, which will cause great trouble to the expansion of the sea of ki. Therefore, key refining monks generally choose to switch to attribute techniques after building the foundation. Compared with non-attribute techniques, attribute techniques naturally have greater advantages, especially in terms of strength. Depending on the attributes of the monk's techniques, the power of the same true essence is also different. Among them, the power of fire attribute techniques and gold attribute techniques is the most powerful, while the power of water attribute techniques is much softer. But even water attribute techniques, the true essence or true ki cultivated, is more powerful than non-attribute techniques. Generally speaking, among the techniques of the same level, the true essence cultivated by the most powerful fire attribute techniques is more than 1.5 times the power of the true essence cultivated by non-attribute techniques. Among the same level foundation building cultivators, the difference in cultivation techniques is also one of the important reasons for the difference in strength. Chen Daoxuan threw one piece of wine singing stone after another into the melting furnace. Compared with first level spiritual ores such as red copper, ore and black iron ore, although wine singing stone is also a first level spiritual ore, it contains a trace of wind attribute power, so its price is more than twice as high as red copper ore. Not only that, in order to refine a first level wind attribute flying sword, Chen Daoxuan needs to refine more spiritual ores. This is also the reason why Chen Daoxuan has only refined one first level top grade flying sword in all these years. His low cultivation and insufficient true energy are only one aspect. Another important reason is that the refining process of a first level top grade flying sword is more difficult, and the difficulty of melting the formation is also greater. Chen Daoxuan is not worried about melting the formation, not to mention that he has understood how to melt the formation before. Even with the function of storing enlightenment in the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra, he has basically figured out how to melt the formation of a second level magic weapon. The only thing Chen Daoxuan lacks now is the ability to refine second level spiritual ore, otherwise he can try to refine second level magic tools. Of course, using the Rangling furnace to refine second level spiritual ore is a good idea, but even if he refines a second level magic tool now, it is not very meaningful. With his cultivation, he still feels strenuous to use a first level top grade flying sword. A second level flying sword is not something he can use at all, and refining it is just a decoration, a thankless task. Controlling the joystick of the Rangling furnace, Chen Daoxuan's face is solemn, and he uses his spiritual sense to observe the changes of the Fengying, or in the furnace. Unknowingly, 10 hours have passed. A large amount of Fengying ore finally melted and deformed slowly under the refining of the Rangling furnace. The melted spiritual ore, under the effect of the Rangling formation, gradually merged into one. Even the trace of wind attribute power on the Fengying stone gradually merged with the spiritual charm. Although the wind attribute power on each Fengying stone is very scarce, the wind attribute power on so many Fengying stones is gathered together. The property change is still very obvious. Taking out the refined materials, Chen Daoxuan clearly felt that this ball of liquid embryo material and the embryo material extracted from red copper ore exuded a completely different breath. This breath is the breath of attribute power. Seeing this ball of boiling liquid embryo material in front of him, Chen Daoxuan did not dare to neglect it and quickly controlled the true energy to shape it according to the style of a flying sword. After an incense stick, a flying sword-shaped embryo appeared in front of Chen Daoxuan. Seeing this, he took a deep breath. Chen Daoxuan knew that the next step was the biggest difficulty in refining a first level upper grade magic weapon. Compared with a first level lower grade magic weapon, the difficulty of melting the array of a first level upper grade magic weapon is much greater. Because a first level lower grade magic weapon only requires a maximum of 3 melting arrays, that is, 3 layer array patterns. And a first level upper grade magic weapon requires at least 7 melting arrays. The requirements for the first grade magic weapon that Chen Daoxuan refined were naturally higher. He wanted to do the same as the Fixu sword he had refined before, melting the formation 9 times to reach the limit of the first grade magic weapon, the 9 layer formation pattern. Chen Daoxuan was full of confidence in this, because not only had his cultivation level been raised to the 5th level of ki refining, but most importantly, his spiritual consciousness and true ki did not consume any energy during the process of refining the materials. Now he was almost in full condition, so it was natural for him to melt the formation easily. Chapter 71, Two Swords Combined, Chasing the Wind and Rain. As the array patterns were engraved on the flying sword embryo, a trace of wind attribute power also swirled on the sword body. Gradually, the wind attribute power swelling around the sword body increased, and gradually began to affect the engraving of the array patterns. Chen Daoxuan, who had refined a first grade top grade flying sword, knew that the success or failure of refining this sword depended on this move. He held his breath and concentrated his mind. not affected by the wind, attribute power swelling around the sword body at all. The true key engraved one array pattern after another on the sword body under the control of his spiritual consciousness. The array pattern appeared on the sword body, and soon, it was hidden in the sword body, and merged with the embryo. 1, 2, 3. As the array patterns continued to overlap, Chen Daoxuan's forehead began to sweat slightly. This was a manifestation of the high consumption of spiritual consciousness and true ki. Obviously, even with the assistance of the wrangling furnace, refining a first-grade top-grade flying sword was still a lot of consumption for him. It is conceivable how lucky he was to refine the Fixu sword. 6, 7, 8 to the end. The wind attribute power on the sword is like a substance intertwined with the spirit, indistinguishable from each other. At this moment, Chen Daoxuan has two choices. One is to give up on engraving the array pattern. In this way, he will get a first-grade superior flying sword that is slightly inferior to the Fixu sword. The second is to continue engraving the array pattern. For Chen Daoxuan, giving up is obviously impossible. He was able to refine the Fixu sword when he was at the 3rd level of key refining. What's more, he is now at the 5th level of key refining and has the help of the wrangling furnace. Although it is still difficult for him to refine a first-grade superior flying sword with 9-layer array patterns, it is much simpler than before. Sure enough, as the engraving of the 9th array pattern was gradually completed, the wind attribute power and spirit charm lingering on the sword body slowly converged with the array pattern, and finally merged with the flying sword. At this moment, this flying sword looks nothing magical except for the spiritual light that flows from time to time on the sword body, to prove its extraordinary origin. But Chen Daoxuan breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that this time he had succeeded in refining a first-class wind-attributed flying sword. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan showed a happy smile on his face. For more than a month, he had been tortured by teaching the younger generation of Chen family cultivators how to refine weapons every day. Today, he finally had a rare good mood. He had his second magical weapon, a first-class wind-attributed flying sword. From then on, he had 2 flying swords, and both were top-level first-class flying swords with 9-layer formation patterns. If this grade of flying sword was put in Zhao's auction house, it would be auctioned at a sky-high price of at least 1,000 spirit stones. Of course, neither the Chen family nor Chen Daoxuan was short of spirit stones for the time being, so he would not sell it. Looking at the flying sword, which was completely different from the flying snow sword, Chen Daoxuan murmured, "What name should I give you? Flying snow is like plum blossoms, breeze carries shadows, let's call you the Chengiying sword." As if it understood what he said, the Chengiying sword made a light sound, and under Chen Daoxuan's control, it swam around his body like a fish. I don't know if it was his illusion, but Chen Daoxuan felt that the resistance of the Chengiying sword when it cut through the air seemed to be much smaller than that of the Fixu sword. Is this the bonus brought by the power of wind attribute? Chen Daoxuan murmured, "It's just ordinary control, and the Chengiying sword has this effect. If I use the chasing wind sword art, I don't know what the scene will be." Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan's heart suddenly became restless. At this time, there was a movement in the storage bag. Chen Daoxuan took out the green scales in the storage bag. It turned out to be a message from Eluoli. It was time for the transaction agreed by the two. Put away the green scales. Chen Daoxuan stroked the light blade of the Chengiying sword and reluctantly put it into the storage bag. Unlock the soundproof formation. Chen Daoxuan walked out of the production room and found that Chen Daoxuan and his friends were still learning to refine weapons in the next production room. His dissatisfaction with the 5 young monks of the Chen family these days suddenly subsided a lot. Although Chen Daoxuan and his friends did not have much talent in refining weapons, but with this enthusiasm for learning, plus their unparalleled learning environment and resources, Chen Daoxuan believed that they would be able to achieve some success in refining weapons. Carefully left the Hongmeng flying sword factory, Chen Daoxuan flew up in the wind and flew towards the Redwood Island Sea Viewing Pavilion. Redwood Island. The moonlight sprinkled on the sea, covering the sea viewing pavilion in the seawater with a layer of silver sand. Chen Daoxuan, dressed in white, stood on the sea, facing the moonlight, like an immortal. "Are you here early again?" Chen Daoxuan said silently. There was no other way. Chuanghu Island was only 400 miles away from Hongshan Island, while the Demonate Mountain of the Mermaids was 10,000 miles away. Although Eluoli and the others always set out in advance, and their own speed was much faster than Chen Daoxuan, they still couldn't get to Hongshan Island as quickly as he did. He flew and landed at the Guanhe Pavilion. Chen Daoxuan looked at the watermarks in the pavilion, washed by the seawater, and used the fire control technique to evaporate the water stains. He immediately sat on the stone bench and closed his eyes to rest. He said he closed his eyes to rest. In fact, his consciousness sank into the depths of his sea of consciousness. In the sea of consciousness, 10 stardusts were constantly rotating around a volume of golden scriptures. It only took me 6 months to practice the chasing wind sword art and the covering rain sword art to perfection. But now more than 4 months have passed, and after so many enlightenments, I still can't even get a clue to the fusion of the two sword arts. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. All along, relying on the ability of the Hongmeng Enlightenment Sutra to store his understanding, he was able to learn skills, comprehend sword techniques, and even deduce the unprecedented soul melting formation. But he did not expect that when he merged the 2 first level sword techniques into one, he encountered a bottleneck. Even multiple enlightenments could not break through this bottleneck. If it were not for the clear mention in the Jade Slip that these 2 sword techniques were split from a complete sword technique, Chen Daoxuan would probably have suspected that the person in charge of exchanging skills and sword techniques in the Kainiuan sword sect was playing a trick on the Chen family. No matter what, try again. Chen Daoxuan made up his mind, and the 10 stardusts collided again. The next second, Chen Daoxuan's consciousness continued to rise, and the familiar enlightenment appeared again. Half an incense stick later, Chen Daoxuan closed his eyes and stood up suddenly. 2 flying swords flew out of his storage bag and surrounded him. Chen Daoxuan himself also flew out of the Guanhe Pavilion, facing the moonlight, standing on the sea, as if he was comprehending something. At this moment, moonlight, seawater, and a Taoist priest in white holding a sword seemed to merge into one. The next second, this picture was broken by Chen Daoxuan. He opened his eyes without a trace of emotion. As his eyes opened, the 2 flying swords surrounding him also burst out with terrifying sword light. Hua hua hua. The 2 flying swords chased each other in the air and finally disappeared. Then, it rained on the sea, hazy, covering the sea surface of 100 feet in radius. Not far away from the seabed, a petite figure seemed to have noticed something and suddenly accelerated forward. Behind him, the mermaids were worried about their princess, so they quickened their pace and followed closely. Half a cup of tea later, Eluoli rushed to the sea not far from the Guanhe Pavilion and saw a scene that she would never forget in her life. A Taoist priest in white stood on the sea, his body shrouded in rain, hazy and unclear. Eluoli discovered through his breath that this Taoist priest was none other than Chen Daoxuan. But at this moment, Chen Daoxuan seemed to be in a state of enlightenment. Eluoli, who was also a cultivator, knew how rare this state was for a cultivator, so she naturally did not make a sound to disturb him. The next second, the rain seemed to become suddenly more rapid, and along with the rain, there were also white streaks. I don't know why. When Eluoli saw the white streaks in the rain, she felt that all the hairs on her body stood up. Is that the wind? Eluoli murmured uncertainly. Although she was the princess of the mermaid tribe, Eluoli had never seen such a mysterious sword technique. Seeing the sad and beautiful picture in front of her, she was stunned for a moment. Chapter 72, Innate Magical Powers. Chen Daoxuan didn't know that he was being watched by Eluoli at this moment. He was now fully devoted to the comprehension of chasing wind and covering rain sword art, with no distractions. On the sea, the rain was sometimes fast and sometimes slow. The white marks were in the rain. At the beginning, it was very obvious. In the end, it was actually integrated into the rain, and the two were no longer distinguishable. At this moment, Eluoli, who was not far away, suddenly felt that the trembling feeling that made her paws stand up disappeared. But Eluoli knew that the power of Chen Daoxuan's flying sword was not only not weakened, but even more dangerous. because the flying sword he controlled could actually deceive the spiritual consciousness of the cultivators, allowing outsiders to automatically ignore the sense of crisis. Eluoli, who had participated in many battles, knew how terrifying this trick would be in battle. Just ask, when the enemy's flying sword is approaching, you will not realize the danger. At this time, whether it is defense or attack, it will be inferior. In fact, Eluoli didn't know, because she was not in the range of rain, otherwise her reaction would be even more unbearable. Even if her cultivation level was one level higher than Chen Daoxuan, equivalent to a human foundation building cultivator. This shows that Chen Daoxuan's swordsmanship level at this moment is enough to pose a certain threat to the foundation building cultivators. However, not far away, the rain that enveloped Chen Daoxuan suddenly dissipated, and Chen Daoxuan's face turned pale. The true key in the Danshan Key Sea was completely consumed at this moment. Damn. Chen Daoxuan's eyes immediately regained clarity, and he woke up from the state of enlightenment. But without the true key, he couldn't even continue to use the wind control technique. He stumbled and fell into the sea. Less than 3 breaths after he fell into the sea, a soft touch came from behind him. Chen Daoxuan swept his consciousness and knew who was holding him in the water. Splash. 2 figures broke out of the sea. It was Chen Daoxuan and Eluoli. However, at this time, the postures of the two were a little ambiguous. Chen Daoxuan was hugged by Eluoli from behind, and a pair of soft hands tightly hugged Chen Daoxuan. Half a cup of tea later, Eluoli helped Chen Daoxuan to sit down in the Guanhe pavilion, and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan smiled on his pale face, and said with a bow, "No problem. Thank you Miss Eluo for your help, otherwise I would be in a mess." Hearing Chen Daoxuan's self-deprecating voice, Eluoli covered her mouth and chuckled. Seeing that the other party was laughing so happily, Chen Daoxuan lowered his head and found that he was soaked all over at the moment, and his clothes were tightly attached to his body, which was very embarrassing. Seeing him like this, Eluoli flew forward, stretched out her white little hand, and pressed it in front of Chen Daoxuan. Suddenly, steam steamed out of Chen Daoxuan's body. In the pavilion, the two were shrouded in a burst of water vapor, and even the atmosphere became a little charming. After a while, seeing that Chen Daoxuan's whole body had returned to its original state, Eluoli retracted his palm and smiled. "It's done. Thank you, Miss Eluo. I'm sorry to make you laugh." Chen Daoxuan bowed his hands again to thank him. "We are friends now, so there is no need to thank each other for such a small matter." After saying that, she winked at Chen Daoxuan. Seeing her like this, Chen Daoxuan smiled and nodded, not knowing what he was thinking. For a moment, both of them were silent. You either two spoke at the same time. Seeing this, Eluoli chuckled, shook her hand and said, "You go first." "Okay." Chen Daoxuan nodded awkwardly. "The last time I talked to Miss Eluo about the purchase of spiritual rice, because I haven't found a suitable channel yet, so this matter has to be put on hold for the time being." Hearing this, Eluoli nodded, indicating that she understood, and then said, "What about the weapons?" "I brought the weapons." As he said that, Chen Daoxuan took off a storage bag from his waist, handed it over, and said, "The flying swords that have been refined in the past few months are all here." Eluoli took the storage bag, scanned it with his spiritual sense, and frowned slightly. "Why do I feel that the number of flying swords you have refined this time is not as many as last time?" Chen Daoxuan nodded and said, "You feel right." He paused. "If I remember correctly, there are tens of thousands of people in Miss Eluo's tribe." Hearing this, Eluoli was silent for a while, and then said, "We now have a total of more than 67,000 people in our tribe." Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan nodded. "I was thinking about a problem after I went back last time. With the speed at which my Chen family manufactures magic weapons, it seems that it will take a long time to satisfy all the members of your mermaid tribe. Moreover, the service life of magic weapons in the deep sea is shorter than on land. In this way, it will be even more difficult for my Chen family to meet your magic weapon needs." Hearing this, Eluoli did not speak. She knew that what Chen Daoxuan said was true. With the speed at which the Chen family produces flying swords, it is indeed a bit difficult to satisfy all the mermaids. Seeing her like this, Chen Daoxuan continued. So after I went back last time, I was doing one thing, which was to train a large number of weapon refiners in the clan. But Miss Luo, you also know that it is very difficult to train weapon refiners. Not only does it consume a lot of resources, but it also requires hands-on teaching from the senior weapon refiners of our Chen family. That's why the production of flying swords has been delayed during this period of time. But please rest assured, Miss Luo, when our Chen family trains this batch of weapon refiners, we will be able to refine a large number of magic weapons for your mermaids. By then, I think your mermaids will never lack weapons again. Hearing this, Luoli's pretty face suddenly blushed with excitement. She stepped forward and grabbed Chen Daoxuan's sleeves and said excitedly, "Are you serious?" Ahem. Chen Daoxuan pulled open his sleeves calmly and smiled. Absolutely true. Speaking of this, we have to thank you mermaids. It is because of the transaction with you that we have earned a lot of spirit stones, so our Chen family has enough resources to train weapon refiners. Yeah. Luoli didn't care about Chen Daoxuan's action of pulling his hand away. She nodded her head and agreed. This is what you said, a win-win situation, right? Yes. Chen Daoxuan smiled. After chatting for a few more words, the two completed the transaction. This was the third transaction between the two parties. They had built up enough trust, so they were very confident in each other when trading. The transaction was completed. Luoli looked at Chen Daoxuan and said, "You are running out of energy now. How can you go back?" Chen Daoxuan ignored this and replied, "It's okay. I just need to recover here for one night." Luoli looked around and shook her head, saying, "This place is rarely visited by people, and it is inevitable that there will be monsters. In order to avoid danger, let me take you a ride." After speaking, she looked at Chen Daoxuan with her beautiful eyes. After thinking for a while, Chen Daoxuan smiled and nodded. "Then I'll trouble Miss Luo." Luoli smiled slightly, shook her head, stepped forward, and grabbed Chen Daoxuan's right hand. The next second, Chen Daoxuan felt dizzy, and when he came back to his senses, he had already plunged into the sea with Luoli. This was the second time Chen Daoxuan had entered the sea in his life. He had fallen into the sea too quickly just now, and before he had time to feel it properly, he was rescued by Luoli. At this moment, he finally felt what it felt like to travel through the sea. In the sea, at a depth of about 100 meters, the faint moonlight from the sky sprinkled into the sea, emitting only a hazy moonlight, which was very dim. Fortunately, Chen Daoxuan had divine sense, and faced with this dim scene, he was not panicked. He scanned with divine sense, and found that Luoli and the mermaids behind him actually had a faint film attached to their appearance, which separated them from the sea. What is this? Chen Daoxuan looked at Luoli, who was holding his right hand, in confusion, because he found that there was also such a film on the surface of his body. Obviously, this is a unique water escape technique of the mermaids. As if knowing what Chen Daoxuan wanted to ask, Luoli smiled and said, "This is the innate magical power of our mermaid race." Chapter 73 Factory Expansion. Spring goes and autumn comes. Time flies. In a blink of an eye, a year has passed. Chuanghu Island. About 10 miles away from the industrial zone, a huge mansion with green bricks and green tiles covering hundreds of acres is located on the main spiritual eye of the spiritual vein. The owner of this mansion is Chen Daoxuan, the young patriarch of the Chen family. On weekdays, in addition to Chen Daoxuan, there are only some young women of the Chen family serving as maids in this spiritual mansion, cleaning for Chen Daoxuan, and maintaining the flowers and plants in the spiritual mansion. Fortunately, it is located on the Chen family's spiritual vein. As the spiritual energy becomes more and more abundant, the environment here has become more spiritual and beautiful. Compared with the wilderness plain outside the gathering spirit array, it is completely different. In the spiritual mansion, in a fresh and elegant courtyard, a figure sits cross-legged in front of the spiritual pond. Above the spiritual pond, a water spirit bead was quietly suspended. Wisps of mist gathered from the spiritual pond towards the water spirit bead. After being purified by the water spirit bead, it then spewed out a more refined spiritual energy, which was absorbed and refined by the figure in front of the spiritual pond, transformed into true ki, and finally stored in the Danshan Ki Sea. Chen Daoxuan opened his eyes, and a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. Compared with the spiritual eye in the cave in the Red Copper Mountains, the spiritual energy in this spiritual pond in front of him was many times more abundant. Not to mention in front of this spiritual pond, even in the spiritual gathering array with a radius of 10 miles, the spiritual energy floating in the air was not much less than the spiritual energy in the spiritual eye at that time. Compared with the past, the current cultivation environment is like heaven. I didn't expect that the difference between the late stage of key refining and the middle stage of key refining is so big. It took me nearly a year to break through from the 6th level of key refining to the 7th level of key refining. Chen Daoxuan sighed. Although he knew that the later the cultivation, the more difficult it would be. But he didn't expect that the barrier from the middle stage to the late stage of key refining would block him for nearly a year. Chen Daoxuan is already 17 years old this year, almost 18 years old. Compared with a year and a half ago, his immature face has become more mature. Especially during this period of time, he has been in charge of family affairs, and his temperament has changed dramatically. He is no longer a young cultivator, but a patriarch of the Chen family who holds the power of the family. While thinking, a figure flew over from a distance. Chen Daoxuan looked up and saw that it was Chen Daolian, the only female cultivator of the Chen family. In more than a year, with the help of the water spirit pearl, the key gathering pill and the first level spiritual veins, Chen Daolian's cultivation has made great progress and has reached the 3rd level of key refining. Compared with the 5 years that Chen Daoxuan took to break through from the 1st level of key refining to the 3rd level of key refining, it is 5 times faster. Not only Chen Daolian, but Chen Daochu is also at the 3rd level of key refining like her. As for the other 3 who broke through the 1st level of key refining at the same time, except for Chen Daochuan who broke through to the 2nd level of key refining, the other 2, like the remaining 4 immortal seedlings, are still at the 1st level of key refining. There is nothing that can be done about it. Despite the assistance of various resources, under the same resources, cultivators with good spiritual roots will practice faster than cultivators with poor spiritual roots. In fact, it is only these cultivators with low spiritual roots who are lucky enough to be born in the Chen family. If they were in a big family, cultivators with poor spiritual roots like them would not get many resources at all. Not to mention, having the same treatment as cultivators with high spiritual roots. The Chen family is not short of cultivation resources now, but they are short of people, so they throw resources into it regardless of cost. It can be predicted that as the newborn children of the Chen family grow up, the Chen family will definitely get closer and closer to the big families in terms of the allocation of cultivation resources. Those with good qualifications will also be given priority. After all, only in this way can resources be maximized and the family strength be enhanced. Young patriarch Chen Daolian stepped forward 2 steps after lowering his body and saluted Chen Daoxuan respectfully. Compared to a year ago, Chen Daolian's timidity disappeared and she became more confident from the inside out. Chen Daoxuan nodded. What's the matter? The old patriarch is back and he is at the Hongmeng Flying Sword Factory. Really? Hearing that Uncle 13 was back, Chen Daoxuan hurriedly stood up from the futon, and his serious face was replaced by surprise. Seeing the expression of the young patriarch, Chen Daolian looked like she wanted to laugh, but didn't dare to laugh, and her face turned red. Chen Daoxuan glanced at her and laughed. Let's go. Come with me to take a look. As he said that, he waved his sleeves, used the wind control technique, wrapped up the 2 of them, and flew towards the Flying Sword Factory 10 miles away. In less than half a cup of tea, the 2 of them landed at the Flying Sword Factory. With a sweep of his spiritual sense, Chen Daoxuan found Chen Xian's location. Uncle 13. Before he arrived, Chen Daoxuan's voice had already sounded in Chen Xian's ears. Chen Xian turned around and saw his nephew whom he had raised since childhood. A smile appeared on his old face. You came at the right time. I'm testing the refining skills of these guys. Chen Daoxuan looked at Chen Daochu and the others he pointed at and said with a smile, Uncle 13, I guarantee that you will be surprised this time. Oh. Hearing this, Chen Xian's eyes lit up slightly. It has to be said. In the past year or so, the Chen family has invested too many resources in Chen Daoxuan and the other 5. Compared with the resources consumed by Chen Daoxuan when he was learning refining, the resources consumed by Chen Daoxuan and the others are at least 10 times more than his. If it weren't for Chen Daoxuan's constant instruction, if it weren't for the fact that the mermaids controlled a red copper vein and had no shortage of spiritual ore resources, Chen Daoxuan and the others would never have become a refiner. In fact, Chen Daoxuan and Chen Daolian are not a refiner now, because according to the evaluation of the refiners in the world of Immortal Cultivation, even the lowest level first level low grade refiners must be proficient in at least 3 methods of refining first level low grade magic tools. Chen Daoxuan and others, except for refining a red shadow flying sword, can't make any other magic tools. Not only that, they said they could refine the red shadow flying sword, but they didn't know how to refine it at all. Because this step was all done by the wrangling furnace and the ordinary workers who controlled the wrangling furnace. In the final analysis, Chen Daoxuan and his team can only be regarded as half a pot of water. But half a pot of water is half a pot of water. It is an indisputable fact that Chen Daoxuan and his team can perfectly produce the red shadow flying sword with the assistance of the wrangling furnace. This is also the only thing that Chen Daoxuan feels relieved about. He doesn't need Chen Daoxuan and others to reach the level of refiners required by the outside world, as long as they can meet the assembly line requirements of the Flying Sword Factory. Because this means that the Flying Sword Factory will usher in a new round of production capacity explosion. Under the watchful eyes of Chen Ziyan, Chen Daoxuan and others refined the red shadow flying sword one after another intactly. Chen Ziyan took the flying sword they had refined, injected a stream of true ki into it, and praised it repeatedly. It's well refined, not much worse than your young clan leader. Hearing the old clan leader's praise, Chen Daoxuan and others all showed joy on their faces. This proved that their hard work for more than a year was not in vain. After saying that, Chen Ziyan looked at Chen Daoxuan and said, since Daoxuan and others can already refine the red shadow flying sword, shouldn't the expansion of the flying sword factory be put on the agenda? Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan frowned slightly. Chapter 74 Peeping. He glanced at Chen Ziyan, hesitant to speak, then waved to Chen Daoxuan and his party, saying, okay, that's all for today, you can go back first. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan and the others looked at each other, their faces showing a liberated expression, but they didn't dare to laugh openly, so they had to lower their heads and hold back their laughter and said, Patriarch, young Patriarch, we will take our leave first. After saying that, Chen Daoxuan and his party ran away. Watching everyone leave, Chen Ziyan said, Daoxuan, do you have any questions? Well, Chen Daoxuan nodded. 13th uncle, didn't you tell me before that the expansion of the flying sword market in the Sanxiu Fang city needs to be slow? After saying that, Chen Daoxuan looked at Chen Ziyan in confusion. It's not that the Chen family has no chance to ship a lot. In fact, in the past year or so, in addition to the trade with the mermaids, the Chen family has also accumulated a large number of flying swords. Over the past year or so, Chen Ziyan sold flying swords at the rate of 1 flying sword per day in the Sanxiu market of Guang'an Prefecture, and sold more than 300 flying swords in total. This speed, compared with other magic weapon shops in Sanxiu market, it is not outstanding, and has not attracted much attention. However, this matter has changed recently. After listening to Chen Ziyan's narration, Chen Daoxuan was shocked and hurriedly said, you mean, our Hongmeng flying sword shop has been spied on by others recently? That's right. Chen Ziyan said with a gloomy face. According to my observation over the past year or so, there are a total of 43 magic weapon shops in Sanxiu market, most of which are run by Sanxiu, and only 7 are run by small families like us. The profit of the magic weapon shops in Sanxiu market is not high. First of all, their source of goods, that is, those second-hand magic weapons, are all purchased at high prices from the children of large families. In addition, the price they sell is not high, only a mere 50 spirit stones, so the profit is very limited. In fact, if the Chen family had not adopted the industrial assembly line production method, even if Chen Daoxuan used his cheating method to refine magic tools, he would not earn much spiritual stones in a year. Not to mention the magic tool shops in the Xiu Fang City, there are no weapon refiners behind them. Chen Daoxuan paused and continued, the only good news is that there are no foundation building cultivators behind these 43 magic tool shops. Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan seemed quite surprised. In Guanghan Prefecture, foundation building cultivators are not uncommon, but I didn't expect that there were no foundation building cultivators behind the 43 magic tool shops in the Xiu Fang City. This surprised Chen Daoxuan, but Chen Daoxuan's subsequent explanation let him know the reason. The reason is that opening a magic tool shop in the Xiu Fang City is not a profitable business. After deducting the costs of supply, shop rent, labor costs, and taxes in the Guanghan Prefecture Immortal City, each shop can make a few hundred spiritual stones a year, which is considered a fortune. There are even many small shops in remote locations that can't sell a few magic weapons throughout the year, and will even lose money after a year. This is also the reason why many shops in the Xiu Fang market are empty. After all, the Xiu Fang market's magic weapon shops sell second-hand magic weapons, and the Xiu Fang market's magic weapon shops are not willing to buy them. Just ask, who wants to buy a second-hand magic weapon at the price of a first-hand magic weapon? But Xiu Fang market's magic weapons are not like the children of big families, who have special channels to buy low-level magic weapons, so they can only bite their teeth and buy these second-hand magic weapons. This is also the reason why the Hongmeng Flying Sword shop is so popular. In theory, our shop sells more than 300 flying swords a year, which will not affect the huge magic weapon market in the Xiu Fang market at all. But now the situation seems a bit unexpected, Chen Daoxuan said with a bitter smile on his face, because after learning that our shop has brand new flying swords for sale, those Xiu Fang market's magic weapon shops that originally went to other magic weapon shops to buy second-hand magic weapons would rather try their luck in our shop than go to other shops to buy second-hand magic weapons. If you think about it carefully, this is also normal. Who would be willing to buy a second-hand weapon at the same price when there is a chance to buy a brand new one? But in this way, Hongmeng Flying Sword shop has become a thorn in the eyes of its peers. Now the Chen family has two choices. One is to raise the price of flying swords. However, in this way, it will inevitably offend the scattered cultivators and the entire scattered cultivator market. The Chen family is definitely unwilling to do this, because doing so will not only offend the scattered cultivators, but also lose the market. The price of 50 spirit stones for a flying sword is basically the maximum price that small scattered cultivators can bear. If the price is raised, most of the small scattered cultivators at the first or second level of key refining will not be able to afford it. That is equivalent to shutting out the largest market in the scattered cultivator market. Naturally, the Chen family will not do this. If the Chen family does not have an industrial assembly line, it may adopt the method of selling at a high price. But they have an industrial assembly line, and what they need most is a huge market to absorb their production capacity. And the large number of scattered cultivators in the scattered cultivator market is just right for them. Since they cannot raise the price, there is only one way: to fight to the death with their peers. Chen Daoxuan was relieved when he heard that there were no foundation building cultivators behind the magic weapon shops in the Xiu Fang City. He was afraid that there were foundation building families behind the magic weapon shops in the Xiu Fang City. Because at this time, the Chen family was still too weak compared to any foundation building family in Guanghan Prefecture. Whether it was the number of cultivators or the quality of cultivators, there was a huge gap. To be honest, Chen Daoxuan didn't take the Xiu shop owners of those magic weapon shops too seriously. Xiu represented that the other party was weak and only had one person to support them at most. For such magic weapon shops, they would be lucky if the Chen family didn't cause trouble for them. So how could they dare to provoke the Chen family? The only thing they needed to be wary of was the 7 small families mentioned by Chen Daoxuan. Although these small families were all key refining families, one of them was called the Mo family. In addition to having a first level spiritual vein, there were dozens of key refining cultivators in the family. Their strength was much stronger than that of the current Chen family. If the two sides fought, the Chen family would not gain any advantage. This is based on the fact that Chen Daoxuan's strength is at the top level among the cultivators in the key refining stage. Otherwise, the Chen family would have no chance at all. Because now the only one in the Chen family who has real fighting power is probably Chen Daoxuan. Chen Zion is only at the 6th level of key refining, and he is old. If he fights with others, it is hard to say whether he can win against a cultivator at the 5th level of key refining. Not to mention Chen Daoxuan and the others. Although they broke through to the 3rd level of key refining in just 1 year, they have almost devoted their minds to refining weapons in this year or so. As for the chasing wind sword art and covering rain sword art, to strengthen their own strength, they have just reached the entry level. In addition, they have mastered a wind control technique that allows them to fly. With this kind of strength, they can probably only beat casual cultivators of the same level. It is probably difficult to deal with the children of the family. In other words, Chen Daoxuan is the only fighting power of the Chen family now. Thinking of this, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but frown. He looked at Chen Zion and said, "Uncle 13, do you have any good ideas?" After all, when it comes to understanding the SYNOPSIS market, Chen Zion, who has been around for more than a year, is definitely better than him. Seeing Chen Daoxuan's humble attitude, Chen Zion smiled and stroked his beard, saying, "I do have a good idea." Chapter 75, Taking Advantage. Southwest of the Huangxing Sea, on a spiritual island tens of thousands of miles away from Xuanhu Island. This spiritual island is the home of the Mo family. Like the Chen family of Xuanhu Island, the Mo family also has a first level spiritual vein, but unlike the Chen family, the spiritual vein of the Mo family is not cultivated. Instead, it was discovered by the ancestor of the Mo family by chance on this spiritual island hundreds of years ago. It has to be said, the Mo family is very lucky. For hundreds of years, relying on this spiritual vein, the number of cultivators in the Mo family has never been less than double digits. Even 200 years ago, the Mo family had a foundation building cultivator. However, this foundation building cultivator passed away decades ago, and the Mo family fell into a trough. But even so, compared with the Chen family, the Mo family's foundation is still much deeper. In the sky, a figure came from far away and flew towards a cave on the Mo family's spiritual mountain. The Taoist descended and looked at his appearance. The man was about 30 years old, with a white face and no beard, wearing a lavender Taoist robe, and looked extremely elegant and luxurious. The cultivation level of this Mo family cultivator is as high as the 9th level of key refining. He is obviously in the stage of refining and purifying his true key. Once he refines and purifies his true key to the limit and enters the state of perfection, he can try to build his foundation. Entering the cave, an old man over 50 was sitting cross-legged on a lotus-shaped magic weapon, closing his eyes to practice. Patriarch. Seeing the old man, the white-faced beardless middle-aged cultivator bowed and saluted, saying respectfully, "Well." The old man of the Mo family who was called the Patriarch opened his eyes and saw the middle-aged cultivator and said solemnly, "Yuking, why are you back? Is there something wrong with the Mo family treasure pavilion?" Hearing this, the middle-aged cultivator named Mo Yuking said solemnly, "That's right." Hearing that there was a problem with the family business, the old man hurriedly stood up, took 2 steps forward and said, "Tell me quickly." Yes, Mo Yuking told the whole story to the patriarch in front of him. The cultivation of the head of the Mo family is higher than that of Mo Yuking. He has reached the state of perfect key refining. He only lacks a foundation building pillar and the support of the 2nd level spiritual vein, and he can immediately try to build a foundation. It can be said that the Mo family's magic weapon shop is not only the lifeblood of the Mo family's industry, but also the hope of the head of the Mo family to build a foundation. It is precisely because of the profit of nearly 1,000 spirit stones from the Mo family's treasure pavilion every year that the old man has the hope of buying a foundation building pill. Otherwise, relying on the few acres of spiritual fields planted by the family's 1st level spiritual vein and a small spiritual medicine garden, it is not enough to even satisfy the cultivation of the family's cultivators, let alone support the foundation building of him, the head of the Mo family. Therefore, for Mo Chengsheng, the head of the Mo family, the Mo family's treasure pavilion is his hope of becoming a Taoist, and he must not lose it. You mean, the Chen family of Xuanghu Island has a group of weapon refiners, and they have encroached on the business of our Mo's treasure pavilion? Yes. Mo Yuking nodded, affected by the Hongmeng flying sword shop. The profit of my Mo's treasure pavilion has dropped by 50% this year, to less than 500 spirit stones. What? Hearing this, Mo Changsheng was immediately anxious. He is already 53 years old this year. According to the consensus of the cultivation world, if a cultivator cannot successfully build a foundation before the age of 60, as his ki and blood decline, the possibility of successfully building a foundation will be lower and lower. In other words, Mo Changsheng can't wait for a few years. Originally, the Mo family had accumulated more than 30,000 spirit stones to support the foundation building of his patriarch. But Mo Changsheng knew that it was not safe to buy a foundation building pill at Zhao's auction house with 30,000 spirit stones. According to the average auction price of the foundation building pill at Zhao's auction house, the Mo family had to prepare at least 40,000 spirit stones. This does not include the price that Mo Changsheng paid to borrow the second level spiritual veins of others to break through, let alone the profit of 500 spiritual stones earned by the Mo family treasure pavilion every year. Even if it earns 1000 spiritual stones every year, Mo Changsheng would not think it is enough. Thinking of this, he paced anxiously in the cave. For a long time, he raised his head and looked at Mo Yuking and said, "Have you talked to this Chen family? As long as they are willing to sell the magic weapon to us, my Mo family treasure pavilion is willing to buy it at the price of 50 spiritual stones." Hearing this, Mo Yuking shook his head and said, "We have talked, but the old man of the Chen family is not willing to listen to any talk. No matter how we talk, he will not agree. You are looking for death." Mo Changsheng waved his hand in anger, and the furniture in the cave was instantly turned into dust under the agitation of his true energy. Facing the wrath of the patriarch, Mo Yuking lowered his head. After a while, Mo Yuking raised his head and saw Mo Changsheng's terrifying eyes, which were ready to devour people. His heart trembled slightly, and he said, "Patriarch, Yuking thinks that we have to take a long-term view on this matter." "How to take a long-term view?" Mo Changsheng scolded. "Without the profits of the Mo family's treasure pavilion, my hope of building a foundation is slim. My Mo family must have a foundation building cultivator." As if to cover up his desire to build a foundation, and as if to convince Mo Yuking that he had no selfish motives, Mo Changsheng added this sentence. Hearing this, Mo Changking remained silent, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Xuanghu Island. Hongmeng Flying Sword Factory. Is this method really feasible? After hearing Chen Daoxuan's idea, Chen Daoxuan's eyes suddenly lit up, but he was still a little nervous. He felt that he seemed to have some misunderstandings about his 13th uncle, and always thought that the other party was conservative and old-fashioned. He didn't expect that his 13th uncle was so bold that he dared to play this trick. If the Mo family and the 6 small families cannot give up the interests of the magic weapon market in the Xiu Fang city, they will definitely take the bait. Chen Daoxuan was confident and smiled. In short, this method can be summed up in 2 words. As he said that, Chen Daoxuan raised 2 fingers shrewdly. Take advantage of the situation. Take advantage of the situation. What a good move, to take advantage of the situation. Chen Daoxuan murmured. However, if this method wants to work, there must be a prerequisite, that is, to force the Mo family and other magic weapon shops in the Xiu Fang city into a dead end. Force them into a dead end? Yes. A dangerous light flashed in Chen Daoxuan's eyes. If they are not forced into a dead end, how dare they ignore the decree of the Cunning sword sect and choose to take risks? Hearing this, Chen Daoxuan immediately refreshed his understanding of his 13th uncle. Sure enough, this 13th uncle who dared to set foot on the battlefield of Chuan country at the 3rd level of key refining was not as harmless as he looked on the surface. Perhaps if it weren't for the burden of the family, if 13th uncle chose to be a casual cultivator, he might have gone further. Looking at 13th uncle's pale temples, Chen Daoxuan couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Since we want to force them into a dead end, we must change the previous strategy of slow shipments and choose to ship in large quantities. In this way, it is imperative to expand the flying sword factory. Fortunately, Daochu and his men can already skillfully refine the red shadow flying sword, so there is no need to worry about no one refining flying swords after the factory is expanded. Speaking of this, Chen Daoxuan's face flushed with excitement. He knew that once this matter was accomplished, the Chen family would step onto a new level and would no longer be an unknown small family, but a well-known weapon refining family in the entire Guanghan prefecture. Fin est capitulo muchas gracias por legahaster el final no se olviden de del lake buscas más contenido exclusivo y acceso inmediato, suscria bet en nuestro Patreon. Recuda, cada like, suscripción o donación nos americana. Gracias a todos nos vemos en el próximo video.